Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Look at that beautiful image. Also, we saw the source image of normal Sonic. That was a good one. How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing today? Navjack, Nico Jazz, Darkgriff, Sealy Pat, Abel Rassi, Night Sprite, Dana, Matagon, Triceres, Hictor, Steely Pat, Borium, Fantasy Pharmacy. Hello, everybody. Hey, Soul and Sword. Hey, Dr. Tasty. Look at that. Look at that Soviet N64. Hello, Running Wild. How's everybody doing today? Fuck.bat. Important things. Look, Dana. There's a reason why For Me is on the end of the stream title. Everybody works a little differently. Look, Juanito, welcome. Ah, nice. Good to hear, Hictor. I might hit you up, Hictor. I might hit you up for another session of resume filling. Ah. Yeah, that'd be a good idea, Running Wild. Sure, Soul and Sword, what is your question? You can ask as many questions as you like. You've activated my trap card. I have two different ways. I have many different ways of qualifying retro systems. The N64, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Navjack's doing the sickos. Steely Pat's running away. Where's sickos? Yeah. So I have a couple of ways of looking at whether something is retro, right? Simplest. Do I feel like it's old? The N64, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Have you seen games lately? They're amazing. Second, and this is by far the most statistically based, strict. It doesn't rely on any personal feelings or anything like that. Which is the console in question old enough to buy pornography in your region? If pornography is allowed in your region. Yes? Then it's retro. The PlayStation 1 and the Sega Saturn are the same generation as the Nintendo 64. How about that? But guess what, right? Another one, I like this one because it's maximally subjective and it can irritate two different groups of snobs at once. Right? If the console in question was a good red wine, would it be ready to drink? Now you get all the wine snobs going, wow, what do you call a good red wine, huh? That's a good one. Steely Pat's like, yes, this is my metric. Right? Right? Isn't it? Isn't that great? However, what that means in general is about 12 years, right? 12 years is most stuff like a Bordeaux or the stronger, more complex reds. They have too many tannins if you drink them before about 12 years. And so that lines up nicely, right? With the PS4 becoming retro in the next couple of years as a result. Another method is take the console's release date, subtract it from the current year, and then subtract the difference from the console's release year and see if you think games from that year were old at that time. So let's take the Nintendo 64 release date. Not the Nintendo. Nintendo 64 release date is September 29th, 1996. Close enough, we'll just use 96. So 2024 minus 1996 is 28. 1996 minus, 1996 minus 28 equals 1968. Wait, that doesn't sound right. 2024 minus 1996, 28 years ago. 1996. Yeah, 1960. Did video games in 1968 seem old to you when the Nintendo 64 was first released? Excellent work, Dana. Excellent work. Now, the qualification here is if the console in question predates, if the difference calculation predates actual like commercial home video games existing, then it's automatic. So the Nintendo 64 in that case would be automatic. But you can apply that to other things, right? Like the PlayStation 2 release date, March 2000. So 2000 minus 24 is 1976. Holy shit. PlayStation 3 release date is 2006. So 2024 minus 2006 is 18. 2006 minus 18 equals 1988. So then we look up what games came out in 1988. Super Mario 3 in Japan. Mega Man 2 in both Japan and the US. Super Mario 2 in the US. Ninja Gaiden. Did those games seem old when the PlayStation 3 was released? Then the PlayStation 3 might be retro. And there's also the ever popular retro stopped progressing when I turned 20. Anything before that is retro and anything after that isn't. Or like when I turned 16 or when I turned 18 or when I got my first job. Pick any point in your life where like you stopped at considering stuff retro. Bacon Wrath, thank you for the 15 months. It seems like Streamlabs is having a time, huh? Streamlabs seems to be having a time. Thank you for the 15 months, Bacon Wrath. Anyway, enough about retro. We're here to talk about brand new games that don't even exist yet. Negative retro. Future games. Type literally anything in chat if you like future games. Everybody does. More games existing is better for everyone. Unless they're like horrid racist games or something. Those shouldn't exist. There shouldn't be more of those. But my game isn't going to be that, so don't worry. All right, so. Yeah, that's weird. I came through on the API, but Streamlabs is like... Even Streamlabels is just, like, locked up right now. And alerts aren't playing, so who knows? Unless did I disable the alert box? Maybe that's the problem. Well, I've enabled it now, but I can't access the thing. Anyway. Enough of all that. So. Today, I want to work on a game design document because I realized I, started... I started, Right, so yesterday's games are retro. You can't see this. I started charting out what I wanted for, like, the architecture of weapons and characters, and I was like, I have too many questions. There's too many unknown factors here for what I need to do, and I need to answer some questions about this game before I can start writing the architecture for the game, because if I don't have the architecture written, I can't write the code for the game because I'll have to go back and refactor it, and I've already got to the point where refactoring the code was a gigantic pain in the ass once, and I don't want to do that again, so I want to finish the design before I start working on the game. It's kind of a cart-horse situation, but each thing is a hybrid half-cart, half-horse, but the one half of the other, and the whole thing is useless. Anyway, So the way I work on game design documents is I focus on the most important, what I believe to be the most important factors of the game first, right? In this case, I'm making a game that I want to play really well and have an open format for adding additional content and levels and stuff. I don't have a story that I want to tell. I don't have a need for lots of dialogue. I don't need to plan out story beats or do a puzzle dependency graph, because a lot of that stuff is irrelevant for what I'm doing, right? That stuff can come later once the core gameplay is done. The core gameplay is the most important part of this game, right? And getting a core gameplay right, getting it working right, and making sure that I can expand it with additional ideas later on without having to go back and rewrite large sections of the initial document stuff is going to be really important. So it's tough, and it's a huge road. Basically what I've got is I've got three speed bumps in a row, and they stack on top of each other. So there's writing a game design document, and then writing the architecture that supports the game design, and then actually coding the code that supports the architecture that supports the game design. So that's where I'm at. One of the things is that I have a lot of unanswered questions about what I'm going to do and what will be good and what will be fun, and how to build a game design around that in such a way that I don't have to... I said before, when I was building Crappy Game, I said, as an answer to a number of suggestions, I'm building a game, not an engine. Well, now I'm building an engine, right? And it's not just any engine, it's an engine for one specific game, but because the game isn't fully fleshed out yet, and it isn't very small in scope, like Crappy Game, I need guidance. I need to know where I'm going to be going with it first. That's the game design document. Now, a lot of that stuff seems self-evident, or it seems like something I can think about later, right? However, there are some really, really core concept stuff that I have to think about right away, because it changes how I implement the very basic elements of the game engine. So, for example, let's take a simple example here, right? For each weapon that the player might wield, right? It makes sense, implicitly, for the weapon to have different parts which cause more or less damage, right? Yeah, of course, absolutely. In order to buy an item at the shop, you have to do a Sudoku, otherwise the price is off by... The price is increased by however much your Sudoku is off from the ideal solution. So, when you're wielding a weapon, right? It's natural that some parts of the weapon should deal damage and others shouldn't, and some parts of the weapon should deal more damage or different types of damage, right? Think of a bat with a nail in it, right? The nail should deal piercing damage, and the bat should deal bashing damage, depending on which part hits the enemy, right? So the bat itself needs to be made of different physics parts, and each of those physics parts needs to have a relevant reporter for what type of thing it's doing when it makes a collision with something else. However, then you go, well, okay, so the character, though, does the character have an implicit damage resistance? Do different parts of different characters have different values? What if there's a snake boss and you want to hit its head? Is the head a different armor value compared to the body? What if you want to have a knight with a big shield and you have to hit him from behind?
I think I'm being followed. What could they want from me?
1981 at Kulikov, thank you for the follow. Right, what if you have a big knight with a big shield and you want to make it so you have to hit him from behind to deal damage? Is the shield a weapon? What if he has a sword too? Now the sword's a weapon. Can characters have more than one weapon? Right? So these are questions that come up, and like they need answers, and I need to answer how they work for my game in particular, right? So I'm going to start with the biggest building blocks that have the most impact, and then drill down to the smaller stuff that is still impactful, but like could go either way. I can decide later, or like doesn't really matter, that kind of stuff. Oh, but I was saying, the question then is, right, if player parts have implicit damage resistance and the weapon is part of the character's body. Holtzy, thank you for the 80 bits. Does hitting the weapon...
in a can.
Oh, strawberries in a can. Delicious. Also one on the grass. And so then the other big thing, right, is if you hit the weapon, does it damage the weapon's owner at all? It shouldn't, right? So there's a number of things there that like need answering. And so answering those things is going to be what I hope to accomplish. Now, that said, I did reach out to a friend of mine, good friend of mine, Dr. Tasty69, and Dr. Tasty69 agreed to hop on a call to help kind of brainstorm these kind of things, and it's good thinking, Dana. Dana, would you like a free game design idea? I have it somewhere. The ultimate adventure game design. Holtzy, you can feel free to take this as well, please, if you want it. Oh, I gotta check something real quick. Good. I had to get a spare of these so that I can wash one and like clean it up and reuse it. Yeah. Did you see the design, Holtzy? Did you see the design for the Ultimate Adventure game? You got a Sokoban, right? And then on top of each Sokoban box, there's a Tower of Hanoi puzzle, right? And then in order to move one of the plates on the Tower of Hanoi puzzle, you must first solve a sliding puzzle wherein the empty space reveals behind it a given number for a Sudoku puzzle. Then once you've solved the sliding puzzle, you have to solve the Sudoku puzzle. And then it turns into a 3x3 lights out. Also, the sliding puzzle is donut shaped. And then once you've solved that for one disc, now you can move that disc around however you please. But you have to do it once for each disc in each Tower of Hanoi on each box for each box in the Sokoban. I'm sure there's more Denny's placemat puzzles you can put in there, like you got to add the sometimes it's a Klotsky instead of a sliding puzzle. Sometimes it's the chess knight puzzle instead of lights out. Yep. See, here's the problem, though. Not problem. This isn't a problem at all. Right? This isn't a problem at all. The boon is that That's outside of my
yeah.
wheelhouse in terms of like game development skill set. So like I can't make puzzle games like that are good, like that work, that function well, because stuff like, oh, you make sure you shuffle the sliding puzzle instead of randomizing it, because if you randomize it, it might be unsolvable. And it's like, I don't know how to fucking do that. I'd just randomize it and it'd be unsolvable 60% of the time, like Dungeon Hack. So like doing all that takes additional time and stuff. Yeah, and you can turn down the respect for player. Wait, I might still have it here. I might still have the design document for it here. Yeah, here we go. This design document is very small. It only took me like 5 minutes to write. Yeah. Use empty space on the slide puzzle to reveal the given numbers. Solve the 9x9 slide puzzle. Solve the Sudoku. Solved Sudoku becomes a lights out puzzle. Unlock plate. Solve the tower to free the crate. I don't know why this says solve Sokoban. Oh, Sokoban or Klotsky. Right. It could be a Klotsky as the main game, and you have to do this whole set to free each Klotsky piece. Yeah, and the respect modes are, if you set it to maximum respect, the game immediately exits. Medium is normal, right? When you retry, you have to start all the way over from all puzzles unsolved for that room. And then on minimum, it's like the Sudoku sizes get bigger. The Sudoku and sliding puzzle sizes get bigger. Right? Get bigger than 3x3. I mean 9x9, 3x3, 3x3 by 3x3. They get to 3x3, 5x5, or 7x7. Oh wait, it is a 9x9 slide puzzle, 3x3 Sudoku. Solved Sudoku segments become a lights out puzzle. So then, yeah, so this is a 7x7 by 7x7. How many? Like an 823,000 piece slide puzzle on the bottom Hanoi plate. Anyway. Actually, no, what is it? What is it, right? It's 49 by 49, right? So 2,401 piece slide puzzle on the bottom Hanoi plate. Or, you could actually triple it, right? You basically have 3 3x3s, 3 5x5s, and 3 7x7s, and the Tower of Hanoi puzzle is 9 plates tall. And then this, right? So on minimum, right? Solving a layer, right? Solving a layer gives you one move. So you solve the slide puzzle and the Sudoku and the lights out puzzle. That gives you one move in Tower of Hanoi. Then you have to solve that again to move the same place, move the same plate again. Hey, Power Down, how's it going? Anyway. Good afternoon. Good evening, Callum, welcome. Anyway, that's that. What I need is actual Word. I want to be able to do formatting and crap. Why is this in like dark mode? Cool. I didn't know you could do that. Add a window capture for Word. Yeah. Window title must match. Capture cursor. Capture client area only. Filters. top. $500. $500. Good. Top. 50. 80. 250. Okay. And bottom. That much. Okay. Now we should have... There we go. There we go. That's above doodad time. We want it. Put it over here. Front and center. Bring this down to... Whoop. Dev stuff. Rename. Word. Hey, Mendel. How's it going? All right. Let's see. So, game design, spinny guy. Good enough. Normal. That's visible. All right. Now, I'm going to see if Dr. Tasty is around, and maybe we can hop on a call and hash some stuff out. It might take a minute to get the audio settings and stuff right. Hop. All right, let's try to get Dr. Tasty on the call. What do I need to do? Start a voice call. Then we got to see if OBS picks this up.
Hello.
Hello. Can you all hear Dr. Tasty on stream?
Hi, Duke Stream.
Excellent. How's the volume level, both for Dr. Tasty on stream and for you hearing me, Dr. Tasty?
I muted your stream and I'm just listening to you via the Discord audio. So,
how's the volume level? I know the mic is a little bit quiet often.
No, it's good for me.
Okay, cool.
I got it.
Let me see if I can. This will probably make it less confusing. I'm going to start my virtual camera, which should allow me to put my camera on Discord so you can see me talking without delay. Because the delay sucks.
I'm putting your Discord camera on top of your
Yeah,
camera on the stream.
And there we go. That should give Dr. Tasty a little extra boost. And let's put on something. There we go. This should be good. Man, I wish I could go below 3% audio for Winamp, but I can't. It's fine. Okay, so we got game design to talk about. You've seen the majority of the stuff I've been doing with the game to begin with, right?
The Spinny Guy game. Yeah, I saw a little bit of that.
Yeah. So the idea is basically there's three kind of component things. Just to, if anyone in the audience hasn't seen it yet, there's three components of like inspiration here. One is the Biles Toad, or Die by the Sword. So like you move your arm around, or you move your character around to swing your weapon around in front of you like an idiot. And like Die by the Sword, it's physics-based damage. The faster your weapon is moving, the more it weighs, the more damage it's going to cause. But also, some parts of weapons, like blades and spikes, will cause more damage. Cactus Bee, thank you for the raid. Damn. Shout out to Cactus B. Cactus B was playing Tiny Rogues today. So the faster it's swinging, the part that hits, and the weight are all going to factor into how much damage it causes. Second inspiration is Drod, Deadly Rooms of Death, which is a puzzle game. Drod is quite a bit different in its execution because it's quite a bit different in its execution because it is a puzzle game, it's turn-based, and it's fixed directions. There's no physics or anything. So you have your sword pointed out, and you, have to navigate down a hallway with your sword while not touching the explosive barrels, or you have to turn your sword at the right times to kill the enemies that are approaching you, because if you turn this way, this enemy will move up to get away from your sword, and so you have to turn this way and then wait one turn and then turn this way to kill the enemy. It's a complicated puzzle game. Bill Bull is a master at it. Third is the top-down adventure game, Legend of Zelda, all of those kind of games where you're going on an adventure. There's lots of screens to explore, and each screen might have either some enemies on it or some kind of minor puzzle element, things like that. So those are the three kind of core pillars of inspiration for this. And I should be writing these down in the design document. Core inspiration. I can't write.
Inspiration.
Core inspiration pillars. Biles Toad. Die by the sword. Goofy dipshit holding out a sword with physics, damage, collision, Drod, sword enemy behavior, puzzle elements, top down, and Zelda et al., which is going on an adventure, shops, power-ups, enemies, etc. All right, so those are the core inspirational pillars for why I picked this as the project that I'm working on and what I'm kind of excited about. Because it's hard to. One of the key things that I find I have to do when I'm working on design documents and stuff is get away from the green sky stuff and focus on actually working linearly instead of just being it'll be so cool. There'll be pits and bouncy rubber pillars and explosive barrels and stuff. I got to stop thinking about that stuff and think about, okay, what is the actual core stuff that makes this game work? Why does it exist? What is the really basic stuff that's going to happen in this?
Sure.
So, from an engine perspective, there's a couple of engine basic features that we're going to cover, right? And I think we already know this, but it's good to get these written down. We want to cover physics-based gameplay using Box 2D, as a core. 2D graphics, top down but not really perspective, using Raylib for the end. Keyboard, mouse, or joystick controls. Also Raylib. Subheading. One stick to move. Left, right to spin left, right. right? So left, right to spin left, right on another stick or buttons or keys or with the mouse. One stick or 4 keys plus diagonals to move. Left, right, spin left, right, another stick or buttons. Keys with the mouse. We're going to have an interact button. What else does it need? All right, Cactus B. Enjoy your post stream. You like Box 2D, Holtzy? Are you familiar with Box 2D? I might bug you. Doing anything else, right? We're gonna have probably pause, menu, other meta bullshit buttons, but that's not important now. Right, so that's pretty much good.
This is fine to start, but it's gonna be really easy for you to start getting into the weeds if you keep going with that. The rest of your design document will answer questions about inputs. You don't want to get too specific too soon. Yeah,
that's why I like the rest of the stuff. It's just like the rest of it doesn't really matter. It's more that it's the key player interaction that's going to happen all the time is moving your character in
2D space.
I'm trying to think of what you call. You have absolute movement instead of relative movement, and you rotate your guy left and right rather than pointing in the direction you want to be facing. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so just before we get started on this, there are a couple of things I want you and probably the chat to keep in mind. I've been writing documentation for games for a very long time. One, I have never finished a game design document for my own project, ever. That's both a joke and a warning. Game design documentation is useful for your own project that you are doing by yourself, just to keep things organized, and to keep your ideas there so that you can see them. But a lot of it's going to be like an iterative process. And a discovery process. So you're going to write your ideas down, and then you're going to make stuff, and you're going to discover a system interaction or an architectural problem that might change the design, and you should keep an open mind about it. 2, I'm used to writing documentation for big projects on relatively large size teams for outward facing stuff. So that's like pitch documentation, and then explicit documentation for artists and engineers to reference when they're doing their work, or for me to point someone at it. Hi, Shaboy J. I'm Dr. Tasty. Anyway, so I've completed more of those, and I've completed documents of my own, and those are for smaller parts of the game. They're not entire documents for entire games. So feel like a game I was working on was player, I was doing all the player classes for this game. So I was documenting all the system I had in mind and all the classes. So and those are very limited short form documents, and then also larger technical documentation, but I didn't get too in the weeds with the technical documentation. So there's that.
Yeah, I think it's funny, right? That with game design documentation only needs to exist up to the point that it is useful for the project to get completed, right? So if this design document covers a bunch of stuff that becomes obsolete, it doesn't necessarily need to be updated. I don't need to go back and update this. This just serves as kind of a guidepost to move it forward to the point that I feel like I can complete the thing. And if I have to go back and change the documentation because I'm like, I'm going to set this aside and I won't remember what this thing does later unless I write it down, this is a place for me to write it down as well.
So there's two ways you can go about it, and you can do it that way, or you can use it as, I'm not going to say living document, but a thing that you are like constantly going in and modifying or using for whatever to suit your needs.
I say living document. But yeah,
I said it once. I'm not going to say it again.
No, yeah,
so,
that's exactly it, right? Is that like I can go in and update it, and from my perspective, and again, like the reason I titled the stream how writing a game design document is like for me is because I have like particular conventions that I do and stuff like that, which is like I know that I'll go back in and update this to a certain point, but at some point it's going to become too cumbersome and too time consuming for me to go back and update things as I go along. So more and more of the document is going to become less and less relevant as the project goes on, and as the project itself, as things there get calcified and become immutable, right? It'll be like, well, I know that I just need to do this, and I might write a second document later that's like, okay, now I need a document about the story and what the actual flow of the game is going to be like when you go on the overworld, and are there dungeons, and a bunch of other stuff like that.
Yeah. So my other suggestion here before like we get started is at some point, like I find text documentation useful to a point.
Yeah.
I mean, we both think a little differently. I mean, you've known me for a while. Yeah. I've actually over the last couple of years have started to find tools like flowcharts and stuff like Miro.com to be really useful for like visually mapping out my game, and I can do that like as simple or complex as I want. And it actually like serves me a little better once I like get a little more complicated with my ideas and my prototypes. And what I like about that specifically is you can actually just physically drag stuff around or like put imagery in there from the internet or whatever is like inspiration or a way to describe the thing you're trying to do. I mean, I do that in terms of like pitching ideas to people at companies. So like that's a little different, that you can use that too.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I have. And again, I think I think a big part of like getting started with this is going to be us like navigating where we each come from in terms of tools that we use and how we approach it idea wise, so that we can speak the same language while working. Just to let folks who are watching know, this is this is a common part of the working together process, and Dr. Tacey and I have both done this multiple times with different people on different projects and stuff. So we're just kind of navigating that set of tools. It might sound like we're being like, well, I think this, and well, I think that other thing, and we're not actually arguing. We're just coming to a common point of language where we can then work more efficiently.
It's the collaborative process.
Yep. And so one of the things that, those tools are something that I plan to use eventually for certain parts of it. Or if I get to a point where I'm like, hey, holy shit, this is really good, I might want to pitch this to somebody to actually make this like a real funded game. If I get to that point, I'll be like, okay, well, now I got to go back and write these pitch documents and show what this is going to be and how the plan is going to work and stuff like that. For today, my goal is to kind of build a skeleton of describing some of the stuff that the engine needs and what some of the longer term plans are, so that I can make sure that the engine's performance meets the needs of the ideas. And for that, I think text is fine because there's not a lot of like, I don't need to go into super specific detail or like dependency stuff necessarily, so much as I need to know what the game is setting out to do, such that I have the building blocks that I can then later put into a flowchart or do that kind of stuff for them. Hey, Sir Spanosum. Hey, your boy Jay. Welcome, everybody.
Also, the other caveat here is that I've exclusively been working in Unreal Engine. So all of the documentation and problem solving I do is to work around or find solutions in a pre-built engine. So I'm not used to writing documentation for an engineer to like build the thing.
Yeah, and I think that's actually going to be really I think that's going to be really useful, because that'll give perspective on like, how does Unreal do it? How do I want to do it compared to how Unreal does it? That'll give a lot of like, we spoke briefly about the idea of like, where is player data stored? Unreal doesn't store any player data on visual stuff. The visual stuff is a completely separate representative layer of stuff that's going on elsewhere in the game's code, right?
Yeah. I mean, it could be anywhere you want, but
but it's useful.
Like
it's useful.
Manager object or whatever.
Yeah. It's useful to know how that stuff is. It's useful to know how that stuff is handled by Unreal, because, like, as much as people tend to dislike Epic, they're really fucking smart people, right? They're literally at the top of their game in terms of engine development, right? There's no better like general commercial engine than Unreal right now. So the choices that they make are pretty well informed, and while there is some cruft from like earlier iterations of the engine, it's a long, like, mature engine that's evolved from something earlier, so some of the conventions you might not make. It's also an engine that has evolved with the most, competent and mature development team in the industry. So there is a lot to learn from that.
Yeah.
And
so
and to that point, the frustrations of working with it, so you can suggest things like, I find this really frustrating in Unreal. It would be easier if it was different, and so I can plan around that as well.
The thing about UE4 and now especially 5 is that recently, like a year ago or something, they put out this thing called Project Lyra, and it's like it's not a template. It's a little game they made with set up with best practices within the engine, and it's very apparent that engine was made to be a first or third person multiplayer shooter engine, first and foremost. And I mean, that's why Fortnite is the way it is. It's built with all of their default plugins and tools and done in their most best practices way. That said, I do have some issues with how to like design within that structure. And it's like, they build it so it's easy for designers to create content, but really it's like a little complicated. And I find most of the time we go in and modify it for our heavily for our needs, because there's like some superfluous stuff that designers like, too many knobs, too many buttons. But anyway, that's like sidebar combo. So
I think a brief commentary on that. I think that part of the way that Unreal Engine is designed, at least as I've seen it, is it's designed for very large teams to use, right? It's designed for teams of like 200 people or 3,000 people to use and collaborate on in such a way that it's not like people aren't stepping on each other's toes. If Bill needs this and Jenny needs that. They both have the knobs they need, and Bill can just ignore the knob that he doesn't use, kind of thing. That's my guess at why it is the way it is and why their best practices are the way they are, is that it's primarily designed for very large companies to use.
Yeah. And I mean, it's still really great. I primarily prototype in my own projects and that, and it's like I'm so used to it now that that's what I just prefer to do things in. And so many companies use it that you might as well just use that anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the way I like to write documentation for my own games or for small projects where I'm working with maybe like a couple of people is to start out with like a major like overarching statement of what the game is, just to like have a base to start. So like you got a lot of stuff in here already that describes that, but I would boil that down to like one like X factor sentence, like what is this game? What's the perspective? What's the genre? Or what is the like major feature of this game? How do you want it to feel?
There we go. The top-down perspective physics-based action-adventure puzzle game. Hold on. One change here. Game with puzzle elements where you swing giant weapons around and it's awesome.
Shaboy J, to answer your question, I don't have like a template per se, and it's mostly freestyle, but like you keep watching, you'll see that I kind of work with the same
the templates in the brain.
Yeah. You'll see it. So like this sentence like will answer a lot of questions and inform a lot of your design here.
Yeah. The X Factor sentence describes all of this in much less detail. But then this describes, like, if you want to know more about things that are similar to this, here's some of the inspiration pillars. If you want to know about, like, how the game is actually played, here's the basic features of how it's going to look and operate.
Yeah, so at some point, I find it helpful to, like, have a list of, like, actual design pillars for your specific game, but we don't have to do that right now. If the core inspiration pillars are enough.
Yeah, I think sufficient, because like it's a Zelda game, but with the damage system of Die by the Sword and like the top down, the character weapon relevance of Drod.
So Spamasum, the one sentence is there to just act as a reminder of what you want your game to be. And when you're writing your documentation and you come across a situation where you're like, I have this idea for the game, and you want to reference that and say, does this fit within my description of the game? If yes, you keep writing it. If no, then you either don't write it or you reconsider your description of the game and what it is. Yeah. And that'll also change your that'll make you think about your design pillars. Actually lost my. There we go. Okay, so the next thing is I fractal mind, Mike. So the next thing, and like you can kind of go anywhere here, but like we don't. The goal here is to not get too in the weeds with like trying to answer specific questions about what you need to do to architect your game. We want to go with major design features of the game. So sometimes I like to start with like a more descriptive paragraph of like what your intentions are for making the game, or like the overall design of the game, and this is like a jumping point from your one sentence. You understand?
I think I missed a key sentence in there, but I think I understand that this is like one sentence tells you what kind of game it is. What is it, right?
Yeah.
And then the next set of information is like, how is it? What does it consist of? What's inside it?
Right. So I guess a better way to think about it is what can you do in the game and what is the end goal?
Right. And this is I think where kind of like my approach to design for this particular game diverges from some other potential games, because the goal, of course, is to win, right? There's some undefined and unimportant storyline or MacGuffins to collect, or that part actually doesn't matter. It could be linear, just a linear set of rooms that you solve, right?
Right.
But the important thing to me at this point is how it plays and the actions that you take and the types of challenges that you will encounter and the things you can do to modify those things, right?
Correct. So you have a goal. How do you get there? So we're gonna list the major design features of this game.
Major features, right? List. Physics-based melee combat gameplay. Adventure. Action adventure. And exploration. Now, here's where I enter kind of gray territory in terms of stuff I hadn't defined yet, because I was like, I'll just define that stuff when I get there, because getting the physics-based melee combat gameplay done is of the highest importance to me, right? But
Sure.
then I was like, this is just the sewer music from Spider-Man versus Kingpin, Mike. So I realized going through the data formats that I was working on that I didn't have enough information about stuff that I was going to do to be able to write a data format that wouldn't have to be completely refactored later before building it, right? So like I had to take a step back and start from this design document to accomplish at least enough of design work to be able to write the core architecture and stuff like that supported the data formats that I was in the middle of writing. I could have done a very simple thing, but I've already done the simple thing to get the little guys bouncing around in the arena. And the refactoring of that has been a huge pain in the ass. So like I need to step back from that and say, okay, I need to define a lot more stuff before I start working on that again, so I do not have to do another refactor like this and be like, well, it turns out that I need to make weapons out of parts instead of weapons being in one single part, because this flail is not possible, and it seems like it would be really cool, and I've been thinking about it for a long time.
Yeah.
So,
and these, once you start breaking down the major gameplay features, you'll start answering those questions.
yeah.
And then you'll get maybe you'll run into a thing where you're like, initially you thought that like you needed to make weapons out of multiple parts, but like this gameplay feature informs you that no, it's something else, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
nebulous, but
I
like
from a technical standpoint, I already know there's like divergence of how weapons need to be constructed, but that's something to get into later. First, I need to know, like, for example, right, like I was saying before, I don't know if characters are going to have different armor values on different parts of their collision, so that large enemies can exist, and large enemies can have weak points, like hit them from the back, kind of thing. So
Right.
that's a complicating
All right.
factor.
Mm,
So
more major features.
the major features, right? So this is where, like,
I think I'm
Crazy
being
Fat
followed.
Pigeon, thank you for the follow.
What could they want from me?
This is somewhere that, like, when I start thinking about major features, knowing where to draw the line is something that I always struggle with, because I tend to want to be like, okay, well, I want to have an overworld. Is that a major feature? Dungeons? Question mark. Right? An overworld and dungeons with a final goal of beating some boss.
Right.
Right?
And
then
part
shop?
of getting over that is just you're like taking a shot in the dark, right? You're worried about like the complications of or the like intricacies of a thing, but instead of letting yourself snowball out of control with that stuff, you just put your foot down and you say, this is what I want, and you throw it out there, and then just trust that you'll get to it when you get to it.
Gotcha. So, yeah, so like in this case, right? I know that I want to have shops and gold and items. Shops and gold, RPG character development, multiple weapons with different shapes and sizes and physics properties, usable items such as healing or speed potion or similar, right? And then traps, obstacles, and other elements that contribute to room-based puzzles.
Now, you could say that some of this fits in some of the other major feature bullet points, but we'll solve that as we go.
Right, and I think like shops, gold, equipment, items could all be one line, but it's useful to at least break them out here to begin with, in terms of like, hey, these are things that have at least different programming considerations, because the goal of the design document is to support programming the game more easily. So, I think this probably covers most stuff we need. I mean, do I need to specify that there's going to be multiple enemy types with different AI and challenge potential, right?
Correct. Yeah. Might as well list it because you're going to need to go over it.
Right.
These bullet points will serve as categories to be described in greater detail. So if there's a gameplay loop that you want to have in this game, that would be also useful to write it down, because you can then use that as a jumping point or a way to connect all of these features.
Right.
Because you can say like, does this feature fit within the loop? Does it serve the loop in some way? And if it doesn't, then you remove it. If it does, then you keep it. If you can't answer that question without linking it to some other feature, then you just lump it within the other feature. You combine them.
Here we go. I had to change size the window. Yeah, and so like, I think in that regard, right, the main loop, what's the main gameplay loop like, right? And so implicitly we know from like Zelda or Metroid or something that it's basically like explore to find places that you can go or that you can like interact with, go there, do a thing there, and get a thing that lets you go somewhere else, right? That's the main like that's the main action adventure loop that most games do, whether they're Metroidvania or not, right? Is like if it's got adventure in it, there's some aspect of free choice in which locations you want to try to approach and in what order, with gating to keep you from going somewhere else first. So it's like, oh, you need the dynamite to blow up this rock that's blocking the path to the next town, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So the main gameplay loop ends up being, right, like, explore the overworld, discover accessible and inaccessible areas, locate key items in accessible areas to open inaccessible areas, repeat until final area. Meanwhile, also upgrade character, make harder areas more approachable.
Well, okay. So one thing I would say here is that combat is like a big element of your game, and there's a lot of stuff in your major features that point toward combat. So
Yes.
I would insert something about combat and enemies in this loop.
There's going to be some neural nonsense for a minute, but yes, I agree. And putting combat into this is explore the overworld, discover accessible, locate key items in accessible areas to open inaccessible areas by fighting the enemies
Fantasy
there
RPG
and
inventory
beating
items, rope and hooks,
a
brass ladder,
boss.
10 rations, short sword,
Make-
leather armor, 10 arrows, 2 human bones,
upgrade
bottle
character
opener, 6 flintstones, 1d6
by
for 5 damage,
earning
d6 stone,
XP
1d4 for 10 damage, flint
and
and steel,
gold
sun piton d6 for 5 damage,
for
10 spider
equipment.
strands, rope of velvet kind, 3 bowls of water, cauldron of water of life, mithril arrows,
And
18 gold
items
pieces, 2 leather armor
to make
squares,
harder
mark,
areas more
morning star,
approachable.
blunt weapon,
do you
2
think
wands
about
of summoning,
this?
2 scrolls of conjuration,
thank you,
8
Sir
flesh
Spam,
golems,
for the
2
5
vials
gift
of acid,
subs.
salt flask, cold iron, flask
That
of
is
acid,
a
chameleon
good
pouch,
starting
waterproof
point.
cloak, scroll, candle, sandals, magic item rack, 3 chests/quivers, 2 feet of rope, 2 books of power, 1 bag of holding, 2
So
arrows,
now
2 flasks of oil,
we
4 clips of
can,
iron arrows, 0 arrow, dwarven bolt,
take
3
our
brass knuckles,
major
3 iron
features
staff,
list
2 iron
and
items of destruction
start
ornamented.
describing them in a little
List of
more
100
detail.
unreleased video
Sure.
games. 1. Bandersnatch.
and you can
2.
just make
Dando
all of those
3.
bullet points its
Cyclops
own
4.
category.
Vassum 5. Unp 1.
or entry or
Bandersnatch
whatever you
2.
wanna call it.
Dando 3. Cyclops 4. Vassum 5. Unp 1. Handgun Wizard 2. Final Fantasy X
I would
3.
play Handgun
Mega Man
Wizard, that
Legends
sounds
3
great.
4. Firearms 5. Hypershock
I don't think
1.
you can hear these.
Gyrocopter 2. Bionic Commando 3. Gyrocopter 4.
Unless it's bleeding
Submarine
through.
Fighter
I can kinda hear
5.
them. I
Wild
have
Weather
the
Fight
stream
1.
down,
Invader
so
Zim
it's not,
2.
like,
Bob
throwing me
Cratchit 2.
off.
Building a More Perfect Union 3, Prisoners 4, The Mighty Final Fight
can I do
5,
this?
The Hatching Grounds 1, Lemmings
How do I
2, Super Buster Move 2, Part-Time Jobs 3, Super Eagle, The Alien War 4,
What
Super
program are
Pong
you
2
using?
5, Laser.
This is just Word.
Cyberpunk Neural Network Pizza Recipe. My top picks for a good Cyberpunk Neural Network Pizza recipe. 16 ounces shredded local Italian/La Canadiana pizza crust. 1 medium egg. 8 ounces of uncooked lasagna noodles. thin noodles, smidgen of Domino's mozzarella cheese, sea salt and regular pepper flakes for the toppings. The first step in my recipe is to make the crust. Why is this so important? The way the
That got
crust is
me.
made determines the finished Neural Network pizza's consistency.
And
If you
son,
like
how's it
regular
going?
pizza crust, I recommend
So, like,
using
this
pizzas
part
made with all of the
here,
ingredients listed above. If not, make
this
pizza dough.
serves a
You'll
couple
get
of
some of the
things.
mozzarella
So one
cheese
is
from
to
the lasagna
describe,
noodles while leaving the rest in the crust for a
how
more
you
pizza-like
intend
texture.
these
All of
things
this
to
is so
work
important it should be written down
and what the
somewhere.
rules
I
might
forgot
be,
and
and
rewrote it while in the
also
backseat of my
any
dad's
like
car. The lasagna
interactions that
noodles are
might
what gives
occur.
my
So
pizza
like
the flavor.
the
Using noodles
physics-based
really
melee
opens up.
combat gameplay
List of stupidest
will be
Star Wars
described,
names.
and then
1. Droopy
when you
McCool
get
2,
to
Elon Sleazewagon 03,
the enemy
Fizzle
type
4,
stuff,
K2 so
the
5,
described enemies and how they work, then you're going to point
Captain
back,
Rex,
you're
a
going to
couple of
refer
other
back
names
to
that
your
looked ridiculous
physics-based
after I
melee
gave the
combat
old droid
gameplay
gunner a full charge in the
heading
cantina
and
scene.
be like,
Connie
okay,
Colada.
how
Do I really need to say
how do
anymore?
these
Do I really need to make sure that my
work
dumbest idea
in-
didn't ruin 5 years of work in a
alongside
film
this
called The
feature?
Phantom Menace? That's all
Yeah,
I
and
want
I
to
think
say. I
that's
asked him,
kind of
"Hammer,
important, right?
that
Because
one."
that's-
he did. He said yes. This
that's
is a
part
new
of the
rating
stuff
system
that
from
I'm-
George Lucas that
I wouldn't
works
say
in all of the
struggling
Star
with it.
Wars films published by
I've
Disney/Lucasfilms.
I've
Instead
been
of determining the weirdest or most who's,
avoiding
names
by
and actually
doing
having to
other
see if
stuff
the
that
actor in
seems
question
more
really
fun
had
to me
terrible
because,
oops
like-
name or didn't because the character was oops or not. I.e.
It's
Obi-Wan
not.
Kenobi. We're going
It's not.
to
I
start
can't
with
do this. It's. I don't wanna.
Most used spells in the spellbook.
Yeah.
Sticks to snakes,
I remember that
fireball,
all
charm
the
person,
time.
good berry, sleep,
So-
spell trap top lore options, enchanter, arcane hunter, and
Right,
spellbreaker
so the
slash
physics-based
cleric or
melee-
dual class.
melee
Monk / warlock
combat
gameplay description.
gameplay.
Good druids are the poet class to the vast majority of players.
We wanna
Due to
start
the
by
more healing-minded
describing
nature
the
of their
stuff that we're
spells.
doing,
Guide to
right?
DLVL
So,
13 Forest. I get things. Because
here
I'm
you
still
do,
learning
like,
low quest are shared with Ballad
top-down
Bloodstone Warboss,
character
where you will either kill him or
movement,
sleep with him. Quest
player
provides infinite XP and
inputs,
max level druid with 15 thorns as
absolute
base trait. No needed other
directional
traits. Quests are repeatable.
movement.
Sleeping at Balor's Lair don't require you to sleep enchanter. You will still
Player
use
is
your spells, but a rare amount
responsible
of them were
for-
replaced by other powers. Some are not affected by
a
thorns.
player
In other words, they don't insta-kill enemies.
may
Some druids
also
lost items and don't have access to some of their old items. which were.
Rotate their character using a stick or keys or mouse. Right? So the left, right on the mouse will rotate your character. Which I think it's important that, like, you don't control the character's position with the mouse. Disguy or sick thing for the 80 bits.
Yeah. But
Oatmeal
my other
combo meal.
suggestion here is to, like, we're starting at a vague, not a vague, but like a limited summary, and then expanding as we go. So
Yeah.
like we started with the one sentence,
the
we
way-
got the descriptors, and now my suggestion in these is to keep it as succinct as possible in a way that you understand it, and then after you've done that, then start getting more explicit about the rules, but using that as a thing that you can quickly look at and understand what it is.
Right. The reason I write it down like this
List
here
of stupidest Star
Yeah.
Wars names.
is-
1. Droopy McCool 2. Alan Sleazy
There's
3.
a-
Kit Fisto 4. R2D2. You can
How do I
submit
put
your Star
this?
Wars names at
Also, thank you, Anonymous Gifter, for the gift sub.
www.starwarswars.com/names. Remember the URL or use the submit a new name button
At
below.
some
Want to be
point,
the first
right,
to find
I have
out
to
about
define-
giveaways and other stuff. Email Dalton once
I
a
have
week
to
at Dalton
very
at
clearly define and fairly
He
early
signs
on,
his
I
emails
feel
Dalton the idiot
that
face. Do you need an official
the
source
way
for
that the
Wednesday,
game is
March
controlled and the
24
way
RD
that it
Plug? I
operates
need your help
is a
making that new
core
deadline.
part of it
This is
and
some
important
amazing
to
art stuff from
everything
Randa.
that comes
It's all
after.
done in paint on paper.
So not
You can buy
necessarily
one sheet
like,
for $9 or two for $16 and get two
not
pairs of-
necessarily that this is like, it's not strictly necessary here, but defining that early on and then everything else following after that is a kind of way that I want to approach it so that I'm very clear and early to it, right? So that it's like, there could be a lot of ambiguity in how I describe this if I don't clarify this particular thing, this one thing, really early on. Sir Spamson, thank you for the food. Right, so it's
Oh, good.
Go like too out of control, you know.
yeah, no. I appreciate the advisement of restraint, but this is one specific thing that it's like the way the game operates and controls is
I'm still hungry.
Is a very important part of what everything that comes after that, right? So that's why I go into this specific detail, and then the rest of it will get more vague. Are the controls important enough to have been a bullet point above? Here, yes, in like engine features. Here, not particularly, but I think that this is the correct place to me to introduce that that specificity, if that makes sense, to Hickler's question. Right, so characters and enemies all have physics, properties, and damage is inflicted based on velocity, weight, and materials of the weapons used. Something like this, right?
Yeah.
What else is important to physics-based melee combat gameplay? Do we need more here on it?
Ask yourself if this paragraph succinctly describes what you're going for.
Position and physics reactions, like bouncing, are important parts of the challenge of doing well at this combat method. Right? Why physics? Why not just, other kinds of stuff?
That's a question you're answering for yourself and not other people, which is the advantage of writing it like this.
Yep. So multiple weapons, right? With physics-based combat, having weapons will have multiple sizes, shapes, materials, and damage types, which all lead to different effectiveness in different combat scenarios. Would it be appropriate to include examples here? For example, can't bring your big sword into a tiny, tight cave because there's nowhere to swing it and it doesn't fit around corners. To Sir Spamasum's question, what's the next step after creating a design document? How will this be used? So, the way this will be used is, or the reason why we're going into a design document at this phase, I already did a kind of proof of concept. We've seen the proof of concept before with the swinging swords and the bouncing guys and stuff. And as I was digging into the code to expand that concept to the next phase, which is some simple rooms, a simple enemy, different weapons, weapon swapping, a few of the core features that this needs to have, I realized that I had hit a stopping point in terms of need to refactor versus a need to refactor stuff versus the immediate execution of things. So if I continued with immediate execution, I was making larger and larger amounts of technical debt for myself because I didn't have a clear, well-defined game design already written down and was kind of winging it based on getting the basics of stuff working. Once I got the stuff working, going back and refactoring it to be more general, such that it's, having one weapon that's built into the character, easy. Having a character that's separate from the weapon, but has two different weapons they can swap to, but those things are a single physics entity, it starts to become exponentially more complicated. And having a design that I can use as a guidepost for that ahead of time becomes much more useful as that scope grows. And since I already knew the scope was I knew the extent of the scope in a general sense. And to reach that scope, I can predict the amount of explosion that's going to happen in complexity so that I can go back and build a framework that will tell me how much work I have to do to reach this exploded complexity and say it's fixed rather than figure it out when you get there. And that's because, like, Crappy Game took 5 hours to make and then, like, 3 more hours of updates for V2. And that's because it was very simple. The scope was very limited. I didn't need to look beyond the initial 5 hours to know that Crappy Game was going to be much more complicated.
It also keeps you in check.
Yeah, exactly. It keeps me from going nuts with ideas, and it keeps me from my problem, right, is if I can over-engineer something, I absolutely will, right? Like, this game can have an unlimited number of weapons. The weapons can be of unlimited size. And it's like, no, there's going to be 26 different weapons, and they're all going to do exactly this. Here's the spreadsheet of them, is the better approach. Okay. Next bullet point. Multiple enemy types with different AI and challenge potential.
So this is where you can figure out a lot of like rules for using when you're making these enemies. Like you mentioned the example of like, oh, what if I have a giant snake boss? Does that snake boss have different segments that I can damage individually? Blah blah blah.
Right.
This is where you can be like, I want enemies to have the potential of of having multiple segments that can be damaged. Like
right. So, enemy types can range from simple, single objects harm on touch to medium complexity, humanoid enemies that also wield weapons and may use group tactics, to large and complex, such as boss enemies composed of multiple physics bodies with largely different and with largely different behaviors and things like weak points or multiple phases.
I want to address a thing
Sure.
that your Spamasome brought up in the chat. Design documentation is solely optional when it comes to developing your own projects. They are effective tools to use as a guideline, like we said earlier, but they are not absolutely necessary to developing your own game. Your own game. Very important differentiation there. If you're working with multiple people, then like the more people you work with, the more important a document becomes, because everyone else has to know what your vision is. But like most of the time, like if you have an idea and you just want to prototype it, then you just prototype it. And then if like you feel like it can't work, like for like an example is I saw like a fucking Tekken cinematic, and I was like, oh, it'd be cool to have like a physics-based brawler where you're throwing people through pillars and shit. And I went in Unreal Engine to just prototype it, and I found that like I just couldn't make it work. Like I can absolutely make a brawler, but I couldn't like do the physics stuff I wanted. And at that point I was like, well, I'm not going to have an engineer help me out with this, so I'm just going to drop it. and it wouldn't have been worth it to write a document about it.
Yeah, so I think there's, in the industry especially, right, and Dr. Tasty, correct me if I'm wrong about this, it might have changed quite a bit since the last time I interacted with the industry, but generally there's a number of phases that kind of happen, right? One of the phases is the pitch, right? You pitch a game. You say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if? And somebody says, you know what? That does sound pretty cool. We might invest in looking at that. Can we build a prototype for it? Can we get to a point where we can get people excited about this? Can we make something that we can show investors to get them excited about it, right? So, or to see if this is going to work. And so you might go from the, I believe what is called blue sky approach, which is you say, hey, it would be cool if we made this. It would be cool if we made this game that's like this dungeon exploration logistics management thing, right? And so somebody goes, that's cool. I like that idea. Let's build a prototype of it. At this point, you don't actually need any kind of design documentation to begin with, right? Because you're just testing out the idea to see is this going to be fun to play? Is this going to be interesting to engage with? Then from there, if you build a prototype and you say, all right, let's try this out. Let's shop this around and see how people feel about it. Is there something cool we can do with this? And if the prototype is well received, then it's like, okay, cool. We're going to actually pursue this. Let's write kind of a skeleton of how it's going to work. How is this game? What is the largest building blocks we can assemble to describe this game and its content in its entirety, so we can say, here's what the game's going to be like. Here's a little demo that you can see how it's going to play and how cool it's going to be. And then you kind of go from like this pitch, you go from the verbal pitch to the prototype pitch to the game design, the game like concept pitch. And then from there, once you're kind of sure that you want to move ahead, you then go in and you start working on not necessarily even a single design document, but multiple game design documents that will describe individual features, individual components. Possibly you're working on technical documentation that describes what engine you're using, modifications that you've made to it, et cetera, et cetera. And so the documentation expands to a point where as it continues to be useful, the documentation of the project expands, and in some cases that might be like for me. I had the idea, I made the prototype, I proved that it's fun to like bounce around with two little barbarian dudes in a room. Now that I've hit a point where documentation is insufficient, I know that I need to go back and expand the documentation to the point that it's useful to be able to continue with the stuff that I'm going to be doing and make sure that I'm making the right choices in code from that point on. However, had I not done the prototype, it's very easy as a game designer to get locked in this cycle of writing design documents first to try to convince people that you have a complete idea for a game, when really you don't need a complete idea for a game. You just need one fun hook that you can show people and go like, this is going to be fun, right? You make that hook first. You got to have that first hook and be like, this is going to be fun. People are going to like this. Make it, piss tanks, right? All you need to say is, hey, Scorched Earth? What about piss tanks? And people will go like, yes, that's what I want, right? And so by building that prototype first, by looking for that hook and then using that hook as your kind of input to a larger, successively larger cycles of development, you then write as much documentation as you need. Sometimes the documentation is one sentence, right? Which is like a top-down shooter.
Yeah.
Hey, Draconic Dude, how's it going?
So my experience in the like AAA game space is that a lot of companies are looking for like we're no longer.
One moment. We seem to have some food on stream. Thank you, Sir Spamasum.
Paper pitch.
I might need to turn the bag down.
Images. What your mood is. Okay.
I can't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dr. Tasty. I can't hear a thing you're saying. It's okay.
Including
I just didn't want you to keep talk. I just didn't want Dr. Tasty to keep talking and then have to be like, I couldn't hear you the whole time.
Okay. So
Now, go ahead.
I'll start over
Yeah.
again. No, it's cool, Sir Spamasum.
Yeah, no
You can
worries,
do
no
that.
worries.
You can do whatever you want.
I'm managing.
Your antics.
I'm managing the conversation. So if you want to spam food until you're spent, and then we'll resume. Thank you, Sir Spamasum. I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. Dr. Tasty with the voices. Oh, I gotta get that Draconic dude. I gotta pick that up. I gotta grab that. Yeah, I gotta grab the Monster Hunter barbecue stuff. Good idea. We should have started a hype train before all of this. Then you multiply your food. It should be set to 2 events, right? Did we have a hype train recently? Yes! Now there's the hype train. Fraglemine, thank you for the 200 bits. Flygon, thank you for the 100 bits. Sever, thank you for the 25 bits. Icy Kitsune, thank you for the 50 bits. Sir Spamasum, thank you for the gigantic pile of food.
Spiked ball fell from a tree,
All that
suspended
work.
by a rope.
Chip chew.
Foot.
Everybody else step it up. Yes. Level 3 complete. Holy crap. It did. Yeah, it tracks all the foods. The only thing we missed is that, like, it's not, you get multiple food when it's in hype train stage. Nico Jazz, thank you for the 80 bitses. Fractalmine Mike, thank you for the 69 bitses. Holy shit. Well, Sir Spamasum, thank you. Taters Games, thank you for the 308 bits. Holy shit. My web browser is absolutely eating shit right now. I'm not sure why.
So hungry.
Look at it go. Well, if anybody wants some of those unvaulted, if anyone wants any of those unvaulted emotes, they're all available now. If you gotta cheer 100, sub, resub, prime sub, gift sub, Any of those,
Choo-choo.
if you need to get the bees. Did the bag crash? Did it? Is it not? Did the brain crash? The brain crashed. Why?
Well, while we're
Why did the brain crash?
we're waiting to fix that. What I was saying before was the process now is usually like, at least in the AAA game space, is in the company that you're working at. Usually you'll make a document that you're like pitch document for internally, and then if that's successful and the team wants to go forward with the idea, you'll make a prototype demo and then use that as as pitch materials, and then the pitch goes to the investor, and then once the pitch goes through and the investor decides they want to see what happens, then you go in and you go into like a vertical slice sort of phase to show them your progress, and then then they continue doing a milestone based approach to the development. Usually paper pitches are not enough these days.
Right, yeah. That's what I figured, is that like that kind of thing is getting not harder to do, but it's like the standard is raising for that kind of stuff. I'm gonna there was a bunch of food stuff here. Severb, thank you for gifting a sub to Mystical Machine Gun. There was a bunch of missed food, so I'm gonna feed it in. If you want to do voice tornado stuff, now's the time to do it, because there's gonna be a giant set of food happening.
My job is to train
Here we go.
Choo 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 choo.
It's gonna take a second to get going, though. It might have done Tater's Games. I'll resubmit it after this. There we go. Yeah, 100 bits. Yes.
Gears. Head toward the theater.
I gotta find that. I gotta find that cheer in this file.
Found him within. She told 20
from here, 308.
They fought.
This should be it. Let's throw that in there. There we go. There's so many voice events that it deleted all of the cheers from my activity feed. It just says there's no events because I have a filter on.
It's so good.
Thank you so much, everybody. Again, if you want to get some of the bees or some of those emotes, 100 bits, sub, prime sub, they're all available now, so you should be eligible for tier 5.
Yeah, shit.
This isn't the neural network. This is just Dr. Tasty. Yes! Oh, love to see it. Look at all those emotes in chat. So many people getting emotes. Hype Train success. Level 6, 79%. One sub, 13,226 bits. Thank you so much, everybody. Congratulations on all the emotes you got. Stream destruction. But yeah, that's my understanding as well, right? Is that like you get an idea, you shop the idea around internally to see if people think it's a fun idea. If it's thought to be fun enough, you build a prototype, and then you shop the prototype around to external parties, along with some kind of larger design document. Yeah, that thumbnail is really good.
And that process is not guaranteed to be real successful. I can't say specifically because I signed a agreement that I wouldn't say anything, but I'll give you an example. So let's say designer named Billin works at found guys non-interactable and builds a prototype for a game for like a not a survival game, and then pitches it based on a popular IP that I'm not going to name in this example of this fictional example that I'm giving. It seems like it's going to do really well, but in reality, maybe they don't even pitch the game at all. Maybe you just Billin built that for nothing.
Nope.
But, chances are they take it to, I don't know, fucking NBC Universal or something and say, hey, we built this game based on your IP. We think that this would be great. And you pitch it to them.
Du kan begå en karriere, der har overdøvet short-steppet til opposite.
One moment.
Det koster none of my shops. The plot is a prisoner, but still with courts. And a traditional instead of a corpse.
Instead of a corpse.
Koga, thigh, say so. The pie, you've done. Doing. No, said round, so gay got it, so me sue me, said stray. Whoa, go like, okay, go.
That's JC Denton weighing in on game design.
Yeah. But I will go home. I cook out of this. I mean, okay, oh my god, now mom, yes, I tried the long. Oh, go me home, yes, I the train, shit, you go.
Thank you, Akabidi, for the 309 bits. Yeah, I imagine that, like, the, Sir Spamison, thank you for the 309 O's. I imagine that the process is mostly not successful in terms of, like, building a prototype, pitching it, and, like, actually getting somebody, especially with licensed properties, to agree to it, where they're like,
yeah, it's a fucking nightmare.
We don't want to pay for a good game. We want to just get free money for owning this thing. It's how I assume it goes down. What's that?
I said, thanks, John Riccitello.
Let's not get started on him.
Yeah, let's not. So your game here.
Right, my game. So I think where were we? Right? Multiple enemy types. Things like weak points, multiple phases. The bigger enemies are going to be kind of rare, and like they might have, I might even do like custom code for those eventually. We don't need to talk about that necessarily in this part of the document, but it's how do I put it, right? Like, I need to know that I'm planning on doing this, and that I'll likely have to do a lot of like custom code for individual large enemies and bosses that will be single use and not part of the
Sure.
backing stuff, right?
But if you can distill that into as many shared mini features
Yep.
or behaviors as you can, you can like minimize the amount of like hacks or custom code you need to do.
Yeah, and that's why I think putting it out there here is useful, because it's going to say like, hey, I want to support this later. So for example, I shouldn't assume that a character is always one physics object that's a circle, right? I should plan for a character has a list of shapes. Usually it's just one circle. That kind of stuff.
Hello.
Here he is.
Yeah.
Free, hurry now.
And it also helps to phrase this stuff in absolutes, like my game or this feature is going to do this, and minimize the amount of times that you leave it up to someone's imagination.
Right.
So, you know, try to limit the amount of times you say such as a couple of examples, or like stuff like that. You know, don't say stuff like that. I say stuff like that a lot, and that never rolls very well.
Yeah, I think like I think a lot of it is like I want to be careful with you. I always want to be careful in using like I will accept if it doesn't do this. I plan for it to, but I don't want to say it will do this. I want to internally in my head, for me, I reserve the language of it will do this. It should support this. When it's like, if it only does the will do thing, I'll be happy with the game. If it doesn't do any of the will do stuff, if any of the will do stuff doesn't make it into the final game, I'll probably be disappointed. If any of the should do or can do or would like to stuff doesn't make it in, it won't matter that much to me. I'll be like, that's a shame. Too bad. At least the game is done and I'm happy with it. So, the game will leads to regret for me if it doesn't. So I do separate that stuff mentally. Let's see. Action, adventure, and exploration. Right? So if we cover the action, adventure, Three Wise Men, action, adventure, and exploration, we look at areas are separated into rooms, but we don't necessarily need to say that right now. Action, adventure, and exploration, we want to describe, what do we want to describe here? Like the overall, that's a good idea. The overall game stuff here, right? So like combat,
combat, and combat.
Player explores a large world where combat is a large world with an eventual goal of beating a big boss. Along the way, they get hints, use shops, explore a bit.
Oh, hey, here's a question for you.
Find paths through a large world and use key items to make progress. Each area areas are separated into rooms, and then passages between rooms lead to new and passages between rooms. Yeah.
What's the end scenario of this game? Is there a win condition? Is there like a last final boss? Is there like what?
Yeah.
Is there an end to the game?
Yeah. Game ends. You do all the stuff. You get to the end. Game ends. Right. You beat the final boss. Game ends. You win. You save the kingdom or whatever.
Okay, that would be helpful to list that in somewhere in this doc.
I think I did.
Yeah.
Explore the overworld. Repeat until final area. And beating final boss, then the game ends. I was ambiguous about it. Some areas have puzzles or traps and other obstacles to impede player getting through them. Sometimes there's alternate paths or hidden rooms. Right? An overworld and dungeons with a final goal of beating some bosses. So, an interstitial overworld containing shops and hints, and then a bunch unknown quantity of dungeons, which each contain a key item for progress and a boss, among other power-up items and equipment. Eventually, a final dungeon with the most challenging puzzles, enemies, and a final boss, after which whom you must defeat to win. Right? Shops and gold. Killing enemies, or finding chests, or breaking props, pots, grass, weeds. Can produce gold or other valuables, which can be used in shops to purchase equipment, upgrades, or consumable items that the player will hold on to and never use until the end of the game, at which point it's too late. Gonna get your level real high. Yeah. Medicinal herb.
Everything in this game is weed themed. Now Soldier Boy can really review this and say it's a game for people who like to get high.
RPG character development, but fairly simple. This is part of an undefined bit, right? So, given the qualities of the game so far, right? What can leveling up accomplish? How much do I want leveling up to be an important part of the game, right? I think that in general, right, I don't think that leveling up should change the physics of the game. Like, you shouldn't get, hey, Drew Stu, it's coming along pretty good. You shouldn't get stronger and be able to swing stuff better because you're higher level, because that leads back to something that I definitely don't want, which is level requirements for items. You should always be able to pick up and try to use something, right? But I do want it to have some effect because it helps to offset the challenge difficulty of the game for players who are less inclined to be god gamers at, like, navigating through a physics-based melee combat game, and gives them an opportunity to, like, hey, if the game's too tough, you can kill some enemies, and, like, if you kill a lot of enemies, it'll make the game easier, right? Because you'll have more health, or your defense will be higher, or maybe, like, you cause a little bit more damage, right?
Yeah. So this is where you go and look at your pillars, and you look at your X factor or whatever you wanna call it, and see if this fits in that.
I think part of it is, right, like, there's a couple of options here in terms of the pillars and the inspiration and stuff like that, which is Die by the Sword doesn't have anything like this, and it makes the game lesser by its lack, right? Because you get further in the game, and the game gets harder, but it feels like an arcade action game where my character hasn't made any real growth. There hasn't been any real growth to my character because I haven't really advanced, right? Zelda, on the other hand, gives you fixed improvements, right? Buy a better shield, find a heart container, and those give you upgrades. But it's not necessarily RPG-style upgrades with experience and stuff. From that, right, there's the open-world Castlevania games in which you do level up and you get more health and more mana and more stats, right? And those stats help you deal more damage or receive less damage. And so, oh, you're having a problem with this? Just level up a bunch and it'll be easier, right? I think that Symphony of the Night does that better in that you never really have to go out of your way to level up in Symphony of the Night. Later Castlevania open world games, like the handheld ones, you absolutely do have to, like, go out of your way to level up to accomplish some stuff.
I mean,
so
like,
I want it to be like, I think I want something like Symphony of the Night in here in terms of how it affects. I don't want it, like, in Symphony of the Night, right? The leveling system in Symphony of the Night doesn't ever impact your ability to do stuff. Those are all found as items, right? So, like, the Jewel of Open you buy, the Spirit of Wolf, Bat, Gas, all that stuff is explicitly placed. And then your leveling up just changes, like, your character's resilience and damage output directly, not like there's very little you don't gain anything new. Just numbers go up when you level up. And I think that's what I want to approach. And the question is, what things don't change how the game plays? And so I think it's just like killing enemies or finding key items gives XP. XP causes you to level up, which improves a base armor factor. Oh yeah, Mike, that's good. Did they blame what's his name? which improves a base armor factor to reduce damage and a base damage multiplier to deal more damage. This effect should be minor and exists to serve lower skilled players having an opportunity to trade time for skill. Right? And maybe that's it, right? It's just health improves, which gives more HP and improves a base armor factor to reduce damage, base damage multiplier. This makes it really easy to program too, right? Like,
yeah, you've got 3 major RPG elements in here that are fairly simple.
HP, attack, defense.
Yeah, and it describes what happens in the combat. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, and I think what do you think in terms of like from a design perspective, from a like fun perspective, how do you feel about that as a kind of as the mechanics in a game like this?
I think that's fairly standard practice in these kinds of games. It adds a little bit of investment for person to put into this game with their time. You described it. It rewards them with an easier way of getting through the game if they're having a difficult time skill-wise. Later on, when you are further defining a lot of stuff in this game, then you can keep coming back to this and saying, okay, does this still fit what I want? And if you feel like it needs to be enhanced or added to, then you can add stuff to it.
Yep. Every time you level up, it reduces the friction that you experience. So if you level up, you get ice physics.
Sliding around, level 99, you're out of control, supersonic, dying off screen.
Usable items such as healing, speed potion, or similar. So players can find or purchase items that are consumed in exchange for a temporary boost or restorative qualities. Healing potions specifically should be relatively cheap and easily accessible. Make it easy to use as a crutch let's not say crutch, let's say easy to use for new players, be able to complete the game. Other types of consumables could grant temporary invulnerability, enhanced speed or physics control attributes, immunity to certain trap types, and so on. Traps, obstacles, and other elements that contribute to room-based puzzles. I'm just going to list a bunch of shit here. I'm just going to list a bunch of ideas for traps that I've been thinking about, and that I think that's a better way to fill out this category than, like, describing how traps interact with stuff. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah.
So, anything will be Traps include things. Traps include exploding barrels, pits, spike walls, spiked floors, bouncy rubber walls that make navigation difficult, which cause damage, pits, which cause damage and reset player location to the start, or maybe let you go to lower levels, spike walls, damage, spiked floors, damage, bouncy rubber walls that make navigation difficult, ice floors, underwater rooms that slow everything down, magnets that pull stuff, gravity rooms which have constant pull, maybe call it wind. There's something else. Sticky floors that slow or impede movement. And room design itself may play a part, such as tight passages, which make using large weapons more difficult, or tight corners, which preclude navigating some large weapons past. Right? Because that's a key component, is like, hey, you can't you can't bring your big sword into the windy cave, so you have to pick a smaller weapon.
Yeah. So this is sort of getting into the next step, which is further taking each of these and then further describing more detailed parts, like we've described the major concepts of your game. So now we need to describe the major concepts of each of these concepts.
Right.
And it's a list of the major things you want to happen. So like we go back up to combat, and you know, we're like, okay, so you swing your sword, you do damage. This is where like it's still like trying to avoid getting into the weeds here.
Right.
But this is now where you're gonna start describing mechanics that are gonna you're describing mechanical systems that need to interact with each other. So there's a few things that you can do. You can keep expanding each of these categories. You can create a new section in this document for the detailing of these things, or you can create individual documents for these individual categories.
I think it'll be less necessary to create individual documents. In terms of the goals of like detail level, there is, I think, a certain, well, to a certain degree, there's some mid-level detail that I think, because I'm not sharing this with many more design teams, because I'm not the expansion only the expansion of this only serves the purpose of making it so that I can design the right system, and I can hold certain mid-level detail stuff in my head long enough.
So yeah,
I think there's some mid detail that can be kind of stepped over to get to some like very specific details about some of the qualities of these things that will then propagate back up to fill in that middle detail, because it's kind of a mechanics first design, where if the mechanics work, then I can come back later and go, okay, here's a list of all the mechanics that I have. Here's all the like nitty-gritty details of what the game can do. Now I can build a bunch of the mid-level stuff using this as a tool set to continue to like, how many dungeons are there going to be? Right now, it doesn't matter. How many do I feel like making?
That's what I'm saying is that's the design part. So the design part is once you figured out all of your mechanics, then you create content.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter. You don't need to list every single bit of content because you're not subject to other developers.
Right.
But like this is still where like you describe all of the major mechanics in like some, it doesn't have to be great detail, you just have to list them.
Yeah.
And then you like you're gonna bounce back and forth between all of these categories. Like you're gonna go to your combat and you're gonna be like, okay, I do damage, and then you're gonna be like, okay, what does that mean for enemies? Like, do enemies need to have a reaction? Do they need to display this? Do they need to make a sound? That sort of stuff.
Right. Yeah. And that's I think, to me, that's the detail level. That's the like full detail level of like working through the process of like, okay, you control a character. Okay, what does a character consist of? What are the elements that make up a character? When I say character, what does character mean? And then drilling all the way down to that to like flesh out what is a character. Okay, we know what a character is. You swing a weapon. Okay, well, we need to know what a weapon is. Let's define what a weapon is. And then the when your weapon hits an enemy, okay, what's an enemy? Here's what an enemy is. What does hit mean? Hit requires all of this stuff, right? That's the end goal of like what I need to actually make it happen. And the question is like, breadth first or depth first for defining these concepts?
Breadth for sure.
Breadth first.
You want to cover all of that stuff. Like we're doing a top down approach.
Yeah.
And we are starting to get to the lower altitude where we can start seeing a little detail. Like imagine you're skydiving from like, I don't know, 40,000 feet.
I can see buildings now.
You can see buildings now. You can tell that there's roads. You can tell that there's cars, but you can't see the details.
Right. So, okay. So if we want to do a breadth first of describing how movement and combat works, right?
Well, we'll want to branch off from your combat section above.
Yeah.
Because you want to be referring to what you described there, and any mechanics that you're describing should fit in here.
Yes. How movement and combat works should elaborate on.
And I recommend a short form description for each of the mechanics.
So when
like whatever makes sense to you.
Yeah,
right?
So like if I describe how movement and combat works, right? The player character is moved by directional input, right? Plus left or right rotation. Movement is based upon the physics system, so has a sense of inertia, and when players interact with other dynamic bodies, they are bounced, moved appropriately. There is an element of what's the word I'm looking for here? There is some amount of variance in this because when a player is carrying a different weapon, their weight and center of mass will be different, leading to other consequences in physics. Right? So, that enemy characters move similarly, but may have differences such as a lack of weapon, different body sizes or weights, and for bosses or unique enemies, multiple components or complex enemies, multiple components to their body weapons, which provide different physics responses. Right? Combat occurs through collision of physics bodies, such as a player's weapon against an enemy character, or harmful enemy characters' bodies against the player. Right? Damage is typically based on total velocity, linear and angular, at the time of impact. The lower threshold so that pushing your sword against something without moving doesn't deal constant damage. You actually have to swing, right? So, what more at this level do I need to describe? Something like, when things collide, the physics system will naturally produce reactions such as bouncing off of things, pushing characters back, or otherwise modifying the tactical situation. Right? I'm relying on the physics to do a lot of the, like, that the physics takes care of that stuff is an important part of the way that the game is meant to be designed and played. I don't have to account necessarily for specific positional or reactionary stuff, because how the physics produces that is how the game works, right?
Mm-hmm. So I get the thing here is, if when you go and look at this document, are you going to be able to process all of these paragraphs into things you need to do in the game?
Things I need to do in the game. Or
work you need to do to set the engine up.
Not yet. the next level down in terms of detail is what I need to know, right?
Right.
A lot of this stuff can remain somewhat nebulous because I know that I need to do a bunch of this stuff, but its design and architecture naturally follows the stuff we did on the level above, right? And how it actually works is defined bottom up from how the actual like physics and stuff in the game works. And then at this level it's more like, okay, I made a character, the character does this, the physics does all this stuff, and so now, okay, I need to tweak these numbers so that it does a thing that I want instead of doing something that isn't fun, right? But the base idea is that using the physics system for it is fun, and therefore, like, combat's based on physics. The amount of physics determines what happens in the, like, meta layer of the game, your hit points and your all that stuff. So it you know what I mean? Like, there's the existence of the game informs everything else that's going to happen in a meta sense, right?
Yes.
So, like, I think that's why I was asking, like, breadth first or depth first, because I think a lot of the answers to the breadth questions happen at the lower level, and so looking at that lower level will then be like, oh, okay, well, actually, we want to describe this way in the middle. Sure.
The way I go about it personally is when I get to this point, when I say breadth, I'm listing all of I'm making a list of all of the major mechanics I want in the game. So, for example, here we've got movement, weapon swinging, physics collision, and then physics reactions. And I would sort that into a list, and then I would describe, like, in a list of, like, very short form descriptors, and then I would create a more descriptive paragraph next to those. And then like I would go through this, like, I can't think of the word, but I would go through all of my like major categories or major features, and then I would list all of the mechanics that are involved in those features. So, like, in the enemy section,
is the call still up? Did you just cut out?
What?
It sounded like you cut out for a second there after you said in the enemy section.
Oh, in the enemy section, I would be like, okay, here are the mechanics enemies can do. They can move, blah, blah, blah. And then I would also list the types of enemies I want. So I would have, like, keep it basic. Like, I have fodder enemies that I have difficult, normal enemies. I would have heavy enemies and bosses. And then,
gotcha.
Like, a fodder enemy is a simple enemy with low HP that you can kill fast. Boss enemy is a complicated enemy with a lot of HP and physics assets that are more complex to kill. And then I do that through all the features, and then after that, I can be like, okay, what needs to change here? What doesn't work in this design? And then once I figured that out, then I go back to the list and I go, okay, what are the individual things in that thing in the list that I need to further describe? So, like, fodder enemies, I'd be like, I want these types of fodder enemies, or like,
gotcha.
or I describe a mechanic that an enemy can do, and I go into my fodder enemies and I can say they can do this mechanic. Like
Right.
I have a Spitz acid pool mechanic or Spitz pool, and like
Right.
maybe I have damage types, and then I say, okay, this fodder enemies can do these things and do these damage types or whatever. But like that,
Right.
that's like way far ahead, right?
Yeah. And so I think part of it, right, is that like I'm kind of in my head, my kind of default approach to this is I would say like kind of the inverse of that, I guess. That it's like what kind of stuff do I want to be able to support, right? What kind of stuff do I want to be able to support? And then what combinations of interesting enemies can I come up with as a result of supporting these types of actions, right? So like rather than starting with the classes of enemies, more so, at least beyond like simple enemies, medium complexity enemies, and complex enemies, beyond those three like classes of enemy type that have different requirements of like making simple enemies is just like the enemy is just one physics body, one shape, and that's it, right? Medium complexity enemies are different in what they require of the code base, because they might wield a weapon, or they might have a facing, or they might have a handful of multiple individual shapes in their collision body. And then complex enemies are like, they're large, they might move parts of their collision separately, they might have joints, they might have, we got to put that in there as well. They might have independent parts of their thing. They might actually even be separate entities. You know, the kind of RPG left hand heals, right hand attacks, and the head does status effects or something. That kind of stuff. So like those kind of big complex enemies, and outside of that, like I don't really think of it necessarily as like you said, the kind of classes of enemies of like, oh, there's fodder, there's heavy enemies, there's such and such. I kind of fill that in as after I've done the work of creating the set of stuff that enemies can do to fill in those different types. It's like I might have different types of simple enemies. Like, okay, this guy doesn't cause any damage, but is really heavy and pushes you around and has lots of HP. So it's like, yeah, this guy is meant to be put in a puzzle room where you have to like deal with them before navigating a narrow path over some pits or something, right?
Right.
So I don't really think of necessarily like classes of enemies so much as, okay, well, I have a simple enemy. They can do stuff like harm you on contact or not harm you on contact. They have all the properties that physics covers. And then on top of that, it's like I can assemble all of those qualities into an enemy that serves a purpose, but I do so from the palette of all the stuff that they do rather than from the idea of their purpose, if that makes sense.
So that's what I'm getting at here. So earlier I had mentioned the design portion of the work, and like my like enemy categories thing was just a example of work. Like, you know, you describe an enemy in this game as like they are composed of one or more physics segments, and they have like the major qualities of a enemy character is they have HP, they have movement, they have physics thing, and then from there, then you can kind of describe what you might want to what some of your goals might be of using
Right.
those as the elements of design.
Yes. Yeah, and that's like I don't know the terminology for this. But to me they're kind of two different disciplines of design, right? One is designing the mechanics of the game and what entities in the game can do and all of those like interrelationships.
Mm-hmm.
And then the secondary part is, or the second, not secondary, but like the other part of it is arranging those mechanics into an interesting set of levels and challenges and fleshing out the content of the game. So the mechanical design and the content design being kind of two separate disciplines, not necessarily separate disciplines, but like phases of the
Sure.
process. And whether those might happen in a different order, right? Like you might be like, I have a cool idea for this story that I'm going to tell, and so the story comes first. And you say, in order to accomplish this story, the hero is going to go through these 4 different worlds. And so now you're like, okay, and this one's an ice world, and so we're going to need to have ice physics for their platforming, right? And so you then are informing your mechanical design based on your content, where I'm kind of coming at it from the opposite direction, where I'm like, I can do ice physics. I should have an ice world, right?
Yeah. So usually, like because you're doing all of the work yourself.
Yeah.
All of these phases are kind of happening for you simultaneously.
Yeah.
And normally in like a team-based environment, like you have different disciplines. Like, you know, I was on the creature design team when I started at Lost Boys. I was on I was doing that's part of like combat design.
Right.
And then there's systems design where you have the designer creating different systems that may not be combat or may mingle with combat, but they're thinking about like other parts of the game and how they fit together. And the combat designer job is to like one, primarily figure out combat, but also how that fits in with the other systems of the game. Then you have the narrative designer who's thinking about gameplay from a narrative standpoint and the story. And then you've got all of these disciplines. You've got technical designers who take the work that the other designers do and figure out how to like hook it up for them to be able to to do it. And then sometimes those jobs are combined. Like a lot of the time, like, you know, I was doing technical design and combat design at the same time. I was handling the creative and the implementation.
Yep.
So, but like,
yeah, I think
usually what I'm getting to here is that in those environments, the whole team is, at least if they're going to be effective, they're talking together. They're working together to see how all of this stuff fits. And like, you know, some games are narratively driven and like a lot of the gameplay is based on what's happening in the story. But a lot of games have like the narrative kind of comes along with the gameplay. So like it's really like here what we have is more of a like gameplay driven or mechanically driven design. So yeah, I mean you can be like, I want to have ice physics, so I'm gonna make an ice world, and here's the like overall narrative for the ice world and why we're here. And or like, I want to introduce this mechanic at this point in the game so that players get familiar with it, and then later on in the game there will be ice slidey stuff along with all of the like other weird shit that I put in this game.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it, right? Is that like, from my perspective, I have utmost confidence in throwing together a bullshit narrative that justifies my use of mechanics, right? Where it's like, oh no, the ice wizard cast a spell and now the whole dungeon's ice. That's fine. I don't need that much justification for the stuff that I'm going to do mechanically. So from a narrative perspective, narrative design perspective, I'm pretty confident that I can produce something that is sufficient and acceptable to me because I don't care about the narrative so much. And the thing is that I kind of want to work from the direction of building a palette of stuff that I can do, right? And then, like you said, slowly assembling an ever increasing complexity. The first dungeon is going to be like, okay, this room has rubber walls. If you hit a rubber wall, your weapon bounces more. And then it's like, be careful, there's rubber walls next to a pit in this room. Obviously not that tutorialized, but it's like, think about how Metroid does it, right? Or Super Metroid specifically, where it's like, okay, you got this thing, and now you got this thing, and here's how you do this thing with that thing, and that lets you access a new area where you're going to do that thing a couple of times, right? That's kind of that design flow in terms of content design, for me, becomes easier once I know what the palette of tools I'm going to be introducing the player to is, what exists in the game, and what things actually are what they are and how they operate. Then I can go do the content design later much more easily because it's like, okay, here's the different types of walls that I have. I think this one is the most forgiving to introduce newer players to, and then there's this one, and then the exploding wall that kills you instantly is gonna appear only in the second to last dungeon, and they're gonna be really rare anyway, right? So I'm probably not gonna have something like that, but if I did, right, and so it would be like knowing that I have those things, I can easily map out how I'm going to put all that stuff in the game and in what order and in what quantity. It's more the case of not necessarily brainstorming, but coming up with a list of the underlying attributes that things need to have in order for me to be able to generate that list of potential elements that will fill out the world. That makes sense.
And we're nearing that point here in the document.
Yeah, that's the ultimately that's the thing. Ultimately that's the thing that that benefits me the most, because that allows me to build a bunch of stupid fucking JSON files, right? So you mentioned something before, and I this is the least well thought out thing in game development that I've ever seen, consistently. And that's sounds. Sound for when different characters move. Different sounds for when different characters move. Sounds when things collide. Sounds when characters take damage or die. Right? Are there any other types of sounds that I need?
This is sound is usually not thought of first, but how I think about this is
Hanna-Barbera bongos for running.
How I think about this is this is part of the details part of design. So we're talking about, we have a mechanic, or we have an action or an event that can occur in the game. What happens when that event occurs? So you have a sword swing, and you say, in combat, character can swing their sword. What happens when sword swings? The character moves, the sword moves, The sword makes
Right.
the sound. The sword creates, and I'm not telling you that you should do this. I'm just giving you examples. The sword creates a visual
Sparks.
effect,
Yeah.
particle, to indicate the swing direction or speed or power or whatever. And then it's like, then you have another event. Sword hits enemy. What happens when that happens?
Right.
So
right.
you got the same shit. You got what sound does it make? What physics reaction occurs? What particles are emitted? What
Right.
sound does the enemy make? Like that.
Yeah. Now, does it make sense to like start with this list that I have on screen here and like start breaking it down into subcategories of stuff? Or like, I should put it this way, right? I kind of favor a depth first approach here because it's like, yeah, okay, I do want to define everything that happens with movement, right? I want to start defining what is a character? What does a character consist of? What attributes do they have? What stuff does what attributes does a character not have, right? And then when a character moves, what happens when they move? I want to like start digging into all those details because
Sure.
like to a certain point, right? Many of the things described earlier can come later or can be defined later and separately because they don't interact directly with some of the stuff that I want to get built earlier. Does that make sense?
Okay. So, like, you can do that, but the reason why I suggest breadth first is you can easily get caught up detailing this stuff, and it becomes a slog.
Yeah.
Because then you're like, oh, I'm in the middle of going balls deep in this mechanic and how it works, but I've got all of these other things, and then you're like, okay, you get to a situation where you're like, okay, this is how I want this thing to work specifically. Oh,
Yeah.
what does that inform in this other section? And then you go to the other section and you're like, oh, well, I need to define these things, and then
So-
you're like bouncing around a lot, and you
Would it-
can do that, but I suggest like just doing all the major, like listing all the major mechanics first, and then you can go to one, okay, and you can start doing the details, right? You can start doing all of the explicit information there and use that as like a template for the rest of them.
Would it make sense, I guess, at this point to kind of, because I have an idea in my head of stuff that beyond this conversation, stuff that I need to work on, and the biggest thing that I need to work on is being able to create further stuff in the game, right? And in order to be able to proceed with that, I need to get over the kind of hump of the first couple of serializable things, which is characters, weapons, and levels. Yeah, characters, weapons, and levels, right? So would it make sense to kind of evaluate each of these major bullet points to see which of these interact with the systems that I need to get working as early as possible and flesh out those and then leave the others for a later time to flesh out, because there's a reasonable belief at this phase that they don't directly interact with many of the elements that that the core gameplay affecting stuff does, right? So for example, I don't need to know much about how the overworld or dungeons are constructed necessarily, only that they are composed of rooms, and that rooms consist of fixed enemy spawns, props, and static collision, right? And then so I can define what a room is. I can define what a character is in context of the first two items. Those are going to need a lot of detail in this case, right? But
Sure.
Enemy types, I only need to describe as far as like there are simple enemies, medium complexity enemies, and large complex enemies, and they're going to need these different facilities. And then I can step back from that and say, okay, here's what an enemy must consist of in order to meet all of these requirements. And then if I need to, I can expand the enemy definition later. Like, for example, it's a level 2 goblin. What does that mean? Well, it means it's got 10% more HP. It means it's got 10% more damage multiplier. And those are like simple individual values that don't affect like how does a goblin work as an enemy in general at a basic level. So like the stuff that I need to get done specifically is stuff that would, without anything else, it would allow for a single screen arcade game, basically, where you can go change some data and add a new type of enemy that's just going to be harder to kill or whatever, but like the AI doesn't really matter at that point. The behavior stuff doesn't matter. It's more a case of like, yeah, okay, these guys are a larger circle and they cause more damage when they touch you, but otherwise they're identical in terms of they just move at you if they can. Kind of stuff, right? Does that make sense?
I mean, yeah, you can do it that way. I mean, the way I usually go about it is I get all this stuff that you've got here done, and then pick like which system I want to like prototype out.
Yeah.
Like my goal is to like get it working in the most basic like function possible, and be like, okay, I've proven that I've got like my idea exists in the game, and then I figure out like, okay, where do I want to go next?
Yeah,
like,
and I think
if I'm doing combat, then I do all the basic combat mechanics, and then I say, okay, I've got my player character doing the things, I've got enemies existing and taking damage, and then I could be like, all right, maybe I need to test what this looks like on enemies that have different levels. So
yeah,
then I'm like, I put in the basic enemy level system, and then I test that, and then I like, it's important to like have like the test bed there, but then also like get to the point where you're building like kind of a little showcase demo for yourself. You're like, okay,
yeah,
now that I've got this working thing, now I want to have basic overworld and dungeons. I want to be able to take my character,
right,
go through like a screen of overworld, then go into a dungeon that has one screen, fight an enemy there, maybe go to a different screen, and then fight a boss or fight a different enemy, have an end condition.
Yep.
And then you've got the building blocks of your game there.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm approaching. The problem that I encountered was I got to a point where I was like, okay, I need to be able to not hard code player and enemy behavior into the code itself, and I need that to be arbitrarily loaded, right? And I need to be able to have the goal, right, is one player, 2 weapons, 2 enemies of the same type, and like 2 rooms, right? And that's it. That's really all I need to have working. The problem is that the complexity of the individual items involved here gets really high really fast, because it's like if I hard code 2 weapons, I can't have a third weapon later, right? Because I would have these two weapons work this specific way because code says so. So what I need is I need a way to have the player character. There's only ever going to be one player character. A lot of that code can be can be special and unique to the character. However, it would make sense for me to make the player and the enemy share code in terms of how they're constructed, so that like later, if I decide I want the player to do something differently, or I want to tune some of the player's performance attributes, that they should be the same as enemies. That way I can tune players and enemies in the same fashion, right? And then second, if I want to swap weapons, or I want to add a weapon to an enemy, then like even if they don't use the weapon, even if it's just there and they're just like walking around with their sword out here, right? Like if they're the same structure underneath, then adding a weapon to an enemy is as simple as adding a line in their file that says, you know, weapon sword or something, right? So the point that I'm at right now is I did the simple demo of like movement and physics interaction, right? But now I need to be able to do that same demo. The next step is to do that same demo, but I'm loading stuff from a data file instead of it being a hard-coded thing. Like, you know, in Game Maker or probably Unreal, same thing, you can make a scene that has fixed entities in it that have like what do they call them? Like an actor, right? Yeah. So you can have it fixed, and you run your demo, and it loads you up in the level, and all the stuff in the level is already there because you specified that it's there, right? And you can look at the level in the editor, and you see here's the player, here's the enemy, here's the obstacle, and you hit go, and you're immediately running, right? Where if you're working on a larger game project, you're like, okay, this is going to be a spawn point for an enemy that I've defined elsewhere. And this spawn point is triggered by this trigger or whatever, right? And here's the player spawn point, and the player doesn't spawn in until the level load is called from somewhere else, right? So it's more of a dynamic setup.
Yeah.
Right? Right now, I was going to say, right now I've completed the thing where I have all the stuff explicitly statically placed. And the next step that I want to do is moving to the dynamic version of the same level where everything spawns in at the start based on using the correct facilities of it, a manager and a spawn point and that kind of stuff.
So like in my projects and like how like in Unreal we do things is like each element of the game has like its major parent class. So like if I had weapons, weapons are like either like a data file or a data asset that it's basically just a fancy struct that has a bunch of definitions in it, and then a system that populates the game with individual children of that major object class that a designer would create and fill out those definitions,
right?
And then, or like a data table that has individual entries of those items. And if I'm making weapons, then I'm like, even when I'm doing it, I define what is a weapon. A weapon is this, and that. And I make the parent class and I choose what definitions I want. And then in my data table, I'm like, well, I need a test sword. So I create a test sword definition, and it's got the sword object or the sword model. It's got the animations that go with it, blah, blah, blah. And then in my game, I have a way to populate or define the character and what weapon they start with. So like
Yeah, let me show you something here real quick. Because this is something that I have. It's like I've been working on this stuff. So I have an idea of like what is a weapon. But I've been kind of stymied here because it's like, okay, shit, like I know that I need all of this stuff, but then how it all fits together to make a weapon like exist is I'm having a difficult time wrapping my head around like expressing all of this in a way that makes sense to me and covers all the stuff that I know that I want to do. For example, right? There's a complication here that when you build a body in Box 2D, in order for the body to like function properly, all of its fixtures have to be included in the body when it's created. And the fixtures are like basically shapes and physics values, right? So here, right, the shape is it's a box and its size and then its local position, right? So height and width, or half height and half width, maybe. Local position, and that's relative to like character 0. So in this case, right, I would do like, oh, it's a box that's its local position is at like 8-0 and its size is like 16.5 because it's a sword shape, right? And so then and it starts facing to the right, which is 0 for some reason. It starts facing to the right and like, you know, it's got this density, friction, restitution, and all that stuff. But then I have other stuff that I want to know about each individual part of the weapon. The spike on a spiked bat versus like the bat itself, or the head of a hammer versus its shaft, that kind of stuff. And so while I was building this, I was like, oh, okay, weapon does this much damage, and the damage is blah, 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 right? Well, okay, maybe not, because I want to have specific parts of the weapon do different types of damage. Okay, so each part needs to have this data on it. Okay, cool. So it does this type of damage. It has this much damage multiplier. Okay, now, well, if the part's going to be different, then I need to have a sprite layer for each different part that's going to happen here, which this should be 5. This should be 8. Right? So I'm going to have different sprite layers for different parts of the weapon. What if I want to make a flaming sword that's a regular sword but also has a layer of like fire over it, right? Well, I'm going to need 2 layers of... I'm going to need 2 sprite layers for that. Okay, well, what about a ball and chain? Well, a ball and chain is completely different because a ball and chain is actually 3 physics bodies, including the source character, plus, like, so it's the source character, it's 4 physics bodies. The source character, there's got to be a handle of some kind, so you're not, because otherwise spinning wouldn't do anything with it. So you need like a long handle, and then you need a rope body joint, a rope joint, and then the head or whatever it is as a separate physics body. And so it's like, fuck, how am I going to fit all of that into a data structure that parented to.
The tier 100 ball chain on chain that ball on chain that ball
I
on
could be
chain
anything
that
with
ball
100
on
bits.
chain that ball on
I'm gonna
chain
fit
that ball on chain that
all
ball
of that
on
stuff
chain
into the
that ball
same
on chain that ball on chain that ball
child
on chain
of
that ball on
weapon,
chain that
you
ball
know?
on chain that ball on chain
That's
that ball on chain that ball
that's the
on
point
chain
where
that
I was
ball
like,
on chain that ball on chain that ball
I
on
have
chain that ball
insufficient
on chain that
information
ball on
in
chain
my
that ball on
design,
chain that ball on chain that ball on chain that
and I need to
ball
go
on
back
chain
and
that
actually
ball on
define
chain
this
that ball on
more
chain that ball on
like
chain that ball on chain that ball on chain that-
more strictly. I need to go back and rethink how I'm going to represent this, because now I've reached a point where like my just filling in the values has been insufficient. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that's where you go in your documentation and you say, okay, what do I want a weapon to be? What do I want it to do? And if you're like, a weapon can potentially have up to X number of physics segments. A physics segment does these things, or you like list out, like an exercise you can do is you can list out scenarios that you want to occur. So like you're like,
right, okay,
I've got my sword on fire example, I've got my flail example, I've got my three-pronged staff example. Like,
God damn it, segmented staff is a cool idea.
Segment staff. And then you go through these examples and you identify common things.
Right. So like is that something do you think would be valuable to do right now?
I mean, it could be, but like
so like regular.
So one thing I want to suggest is do this exercise with yourself. You say, if a designer was coming to me about this proposed system, is the documentation that I have, like, how would I react if they were giving me this documentation? Would I send it back and tell them to be more explicit? Like, what would I tell them? What information I need? And then you think about the information you need, and then you figure out how to write it down. What would be satisfactory from a designer in this document? Is it explicit enough for me to craft a code or craft the system in the engine?
Right. Yeah, and I think part of it is, right, that I need to then fill out all of the stuff that I anticipate that the weapons are going to have to do, right? And then create a case for each of those. And then create a data structure that like that supports that, right? Because let me put it this way. If each of the physics body, if you could directly weld physics bodies together in Box 2D, this wouldn't be a problem, right? Because it would be, hey, I'm going to make a bunch of different bodies. They're all going to be welded to the character. No problem, done. The problem is that welds don't work like that in Box 2D, and they come apart under acceleration. So some part of the weapon always has to be part of the character's physics body. And that makes it really complicated to separate, like, where stuff actually gets connected. Because the character and the weapon that they hold that's, like, directly connected to them is all part of the same thing. And then it has to, like, scale up, right? So, like, when you make a character who's holding a sword, the sword is part of the character's body because it can't be separated. But when you make a ball and chain, the handle, the stick, is part of the character's body, and then the rope, the chain, is a joint, and then the mace head is a separate physics body that's separate from the player altogether. So that complexity of construction makes answering the question of, like, what do I need to have? Because not all weapons have two bodies. Some weapons have no body. A 3-segmented staff would have two bodies and a fixture that's part of the character's body. So that's
the other thing you can do here is maybe you don't have an overarching weapons class. Maybe you separate it into individual parent classes. Like you have your rigid weapon class, your sword that acts the way you described. You have your flail weapons class that is architected to work a certain way, and then you have different kinds of flails. And then you've got like your other ones. But this is where in design, we have to start taking into consideration what is the capability of the engine we're working in. Like in Unreal, it's not impossible, but it is very hard to do. Here's an example. It's very hard to make a lot of characters work in the game at once. Like in Unity, at least when I was looking at it years ago, they have that data-oriented programming shit where you can get like 1 billion characters on screen all at once working performatively.
Right.
If I was designing a game in Unreal, I wouldn't be able to, unless I had some knowledge of some solution on how to do it. I wouldn't be like, I'm making a game where you're fighting 5 billion dudes on the screen at once that all are executing animations and reacting to you and with physics turned on. Like that's never going to happen. So I would be like, okay, either fuck it, I'm not going to make this game, I'm going to come up with a different idea, or I'm like, what is a way to design my game to approach that, but in a different way?
Yeah.
What is a different solution to this?
Yeah, and I think in this case, right, in the case of these weapons, right, I think Box 2D supports it well. It's just a case of like, I have to work around the idiosyncrasies of how Box 2D wants me to construct objects and be like, okay, I need to construct my objects in this fashion and associate them together in this way. And like, for example, right, I don't know for certain that a ball and chain is going to work properly in Box 2D. I don't know that it's going to be suitable for it, right? The physics might suck. It might suck to use a ball and chain. And then I don't have to do a ball and chain. But when I'm starting out, when I'm making this data format, right? If I define a weapon, the weapon has to be a stand-in for a regular weapon or a flail or a multi-segment weapon. It has to work for kind of all of those cases.
Herself to combat them both.
And so that's
Keela drew her sword.
That's the decision. That's the decision point that I had to like reach, where it's like, yeah, I have to account for this. Yes, Soppy, thank you for the 7 bits.
Barbecue poutine.
There you go, barbecue poutine. I have to account for the possibility that I'll need to make weapons that have multiple physics bodies, right? I don't necessarily need to make weapons with multiple physics bodies yet, but I just need to find a suitable solution to store that, right? So like I'm going to store data about a weapon. The weapon's going to have 0 or more physics bodies. It's going to have 1 or more fixtures, and at least one of the fixtures is going to be... I should be writing this down. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
So, a weapon consists of, bullet point, 0 or more physics bodies, at least 1 physics fixture, which which is part of the character's physics body. Oops. Right? A number of joints that is I think a joint only joins two bodies. A number of joints equal to the number of additional bodies, right? Because otherwise you could be like, this weapon is just a big ball you drop on the ground. So in order, it has to be attached to you in some way. At least one physics fixture, which is part of the character's physics body. At 0 or more animation layers, consisting of one or more direction, frame, and consisting of at least one direction and frame. A text name of the weapon. Internal, or no, for display in-game. A text description of the weapon for display in-game menus. And an icon to represent the weapon in the inventory. Right? Let's check something real quick. There's more. Because guess what I'm forgetting? I'm forgetting sound. Okay. Sorry. Hey, Mora, how's it going? Right? And so, sounds. What sounds does a weapon have? Do weapons make a sound when you swing them? They make a sound when moving?
This is the weeds now we're getting into.
Yeah, no, I know. This is the part that, like, collision sound, right? It's definitely going to have a collision sound. Optionally, other sounds for different scenarios. Right? Now, this again, right? This is part of the problem where, like, in order to build this, and not have to go back and make significant changes later on. Like, one of the things I considered, right? Are weapons made out of materials? Is there like, okay, this weapon is made out of iron, and when iron hits a surface, it does this, right? That works, and that gives me a shortcut to appearance and like sounds and a weight and density and friction and restitution. But also, if it's made out of materials, how do I differentiate the head of an iron hammer from an iron sword? Do I make iron hammer material and iron sword blade material? That's the kind of thing where I'm like, I'm the actual execution of some of these ideas are eluding me as a single clear methodology where it's like, yeah, okay, I know I need these physics fixtures, right? Do I attach more meaning to the physics fixture? Do I abstract it to a material thing? Do I do it piecemeal based on the individual thing itself? I can do that for now, but how untenable does that get in 5 months when I'm juggling like 10 different, 20 different weapons?
So here's some absolutes about game development. One, you're not going to have all of the specific details nailed on the first try.
Oh, I know.
Game development is an iterative process where you may do a thing and then later on figure out that, oh, hey, I want more detail in here, or this doesn't work. I need to change the design. And that's like part, like at my job, like I've had multiple instances where like I started development on a thing, I had approval for the design, and then halfway through and almost near the polish phase, they're like, hey, this isn't working. We need you to change the overall design on it. And I have to pivot and I have to say, okay, this is how it's going to work now. Or like an engineer comes to me and is like, so we tried and we could not get this to work. We need you to change the design. And you just gotta accept that that's gonna happen. So yeah. And I know you're like trying to like you're trying to make this future proof, and you're trying to account for all of the scenarios that you may encounter in the future, but it's gonna happen, and you can try to get it as nailed down as possible, but like I guarantee you it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So you just need to try more, experiment more, come up with the design. My suggestion is just come up with the design you want to do, try to make it happen, and then identify problem points as you go, and then reiterate on the design, and then go back to the engineering part and like refine it.
Yeah, I think that how I would describe where I'm at right now is I know no design is going to be perfect, and I know that I'm going to have to come back and touch a bunch of this stuff and like change a bunch of things. But I'm also like, I'm at a point where I'm making somewhat immutable, I'm building somewhat immutable portions of the engine. And so going back to change some of these things would be a likely a project-ending volume of work, right? Because it would be like, if I have to change certain ways of how this stuff works, then I'm just gonna get to a point where I'm like, this isn't worth it, because I'm basically starting over from the point where I was trying to make a difficult decision early on, and redoing all of this stuff is going to set me back the 5 months that I spent on building this. So I'm kind of agonizing over the choices of how to build and design this stuff in a way that gives me the lowest chance of that happening, right? I want to make the right choices because making the right choices increases the chance for project success in total. So that's why I'm like, not fixated on, but like trying to do due diligence in terms of like, I know I'm gonna have to come back and redo this stuff. I want to minimize the amount of stuff that I'm going to have to redo because I know I have certain ideas that require certain capabilities. So I have to plan for those capabilities. But also, there's certain undefined things that may make it more difficult to implement something that meets those requirements, right? So, like, for example, I could just say, hey, you know what? Fuck nunchucks, fuck ball and chain, flails, 3-segment staffs. A weapon is just a single fixture that sticks off of your character, and that's it, right? And like if it's a hammer, then you'll hit with the shaft, and then you'll like that's it, right? Like you'll hit with the shaft, it'll do the same damage as everything else. Weapons just have a fixed amount of damage they do, and maybe a damage type, and that's it. And doing that would get me going sooner, but it also like severely limits a bunch of ideas that I'd like to do later, right? So like in that case, right, spears are out because a spear would then make no sense because you'd be like hitting people with the side of the spear's shaft and dealing just as much damage as if you hit them with the other thing, with the tip.
So, I mean, the way I've been like working on my prototypes lately is I try to keep my like classes as separate as possible. So, and I like communicate via like it's called like blueprint interfaces.
Sure.
So it's like basically I get I get the like instance of the actor and not the specific child class, and then I run a call on an interface.
Yeah.
And that like if it has the interface, it'll run whatever code I have going on the interface event.
Yep.
But if it doesn't, it just doesn't run. And
right.
So like
all the different weapons share an interface of like a interface event of like fire, and then if fire gets called and the weapon and the object has a fire interface, then the fire interface is the common place where those things interact.
Sure. But like I can't, like we're getting to like the engineering point where I can't help you on that, but like so I mean you like identify things you want to happen with the web, like you're talking about like different
said that
interactions between like different weapon materials and different different other objects.
Right.
And like, you know, like what is the commonality here? It's like, okay, I have a collision, and
yeah,
what do I want to happen? Like the things the weapon can do aside from the collisions doesn't seem to have anything to do with the rest of the game. So like, you know, you've got your sword versus flail example, and it's like, well, dungeons and enemies don't care about whether the weapon is a flail or a sword.
They only care about the collision itself and what the what the properties of that collision are, right?
Right, and then when that collision happens, I assume it's drawing upon all those variables that you've defined for that class to make the collision do a thing. So, like, I mean, you can hard code a weapon and then, you know, draw from variables from that hard coded weapon, but then you can use that hard coded weapon as an example of what you like want to accomplish with your actual weapon system.
Right. And I think that's part of it, right? Is that like I did a prototype of the physics portion of the weaponry stuff, which we've seen before, right? And that ends up I have an idea of how that plays out in the physics system, and it's complicated because it's complicated by, again, the grouping that Box 2D requires of my objects. That's the bottleneck of like doing this, because otherwise I could be like, a weapon is one or more bodies that are separate from the player, and when those bodies collide, just compare their absolute velocity with the absolute velocity of the thing they collided with, and Bob's your uncle. There's your like start for a damage calculation, right? The problem is that they're not. Weapons are always a part of the player's body, and so you have to compare the player's body's collision and then check the individual fixture that the weapon has. And so it's kind of the way again, this is like deep into the engineering part of it, but like the way I'm looking at having to execute it is basically when a collision occurs, check all of the fixtures involved in the bodies that collided and determine if any of the fixtures are a weapon. Then determine if the weapon collided with a body collided with a fixture that's not a weapon, and then produce a result based on the two bodies' owners, right? The transmitter and the receiver. The transmitter is the body that owns the weapon, and the receiver is the body that owns the non-weapon body that was collided, right? And so when two weapons collide, something different happens, and that's a different event. When a body and a weapon collide, or when a non-weapon fixture and a weapon fixture collide, then those two things compare each other and go, oh, okay, this is going to cause damage to somebody, right? So that stuff I kind of have an idea of, but then it's like, it's like a data organization problem. Like you were saying before, right? Like you have these kind of structure, you have these structs, and then you have a data table of like what comprises all of your weapons and stuff. And that's what I need to get to, but I need to figure out the complexity of like, for example, if we look at this, right? There was something that was out of place here. Yeah. Damage type is part of the fixture because I've made the decision that a fixture for a weapon contains only one shape. And so then there's a damage type and a damage modifier in addition to the physics properties there. Now that becomes part of a weapon fixture definition that then creates the weapon fixture, and the weapon fixture definition list is part of the weapon, and the weapon knows what its fixtures are, so that when a collision occurs, I can walk backwards to these two values and include that in a damage calculation that results from a collision between a weapon fixture and a non-weapon collision body's fixtures. Ugh. Which that's the thing, right? So it's like, so the chain of a ball and chain doesn't cause damage on collision, but the ball does. And also, like, if you hit somebody with the stick part of it, maybe it does cause damage, maybe it doesn't cause damage, maybe it just causes a tiny bit of damage.
Yeah. I think at that point, the documentation is only going to serve you so far.
Yeah.
I've noticed a few things where you're not like not fully certain of like every kind of interaction you're gonna have. So the good thing to do in the document is like, maybe go into each section and list out the different object types that can exist and the interactions you want to occur for those for those object types, and then like see where you want to define all of those things further.
Right. So like that's what I was wondering about in terms of the like earlier when we were talking about kind of breadth first versus depth first, and the difference of data at each level of description. That like I feel like I need to kind of go into a lot of detail about a few things, and then define those really well, and then build a system that allows those things to exist, and then step back up to the higher level and go, okay, now that I have these things and these things exist in this way and they're constructed in this way, what other things can I do with it? Like because there's a limited set of things that can happen, right? Which is like things can collide or overlap, and there's all the variables that can occur, but things collide and overlap. There's then two different cases, right? Or three different cases. Weapon on weapon, weapon on non-weapon, and non-weapon on non-weapon. And some of those cases can be solved more easily because, like, non-weapon on non-weapon can just be nothing happens, right? Nothing additional happens. It's just a push. The physics takes care of the rest. And then for things like enemies that cause damage on collision, they can just have a non-reflecting weapon box around them, right? They can just have a big circle around them that causes damage if you touch it. So you don't touch it with your thing, and your weapon on weapon collision thing says, hey, I'm not reflecting, so don't worry about it. And then you collide with their non-weapon part and cause damage, right? I think that's the limitation of interactions between dynamic body-based objects.
Yeah.
So there's those three scenarios, and then there's the fourth scenario, which is when a body or fixture of any kind interacts with static objects, so like the level collision, which you never have to do a calculation based on that, right? Because it's not going to be... You're not going to be calculating damage because static physics things don't ever have meta attributes. And so it's just a matter of like, does it bounce off? Does it have... Does the static collision stop it or not?
You should be writing these down.
Thank you. Types of interactions. List. Weapon to weapon. Wait. Dynamic bodies. Weapon to weapon. Weapon to non-weapon. And non-weapon to non-weapon. And then dynamic body to static body, all above weapon or non-weapon to static, and non-colliding interactions as above 2ABC. 1ABC and 2A. Right? Yeah. And then, like, to this point, right? I think to this point, right, if I'm going to make a boss out of a big bunch of stuff, they're just going to be a bunch of... Every part of the boss that's not vulnerable is going to be a weapon, right? And then every part of the boss that is vulnerable is going to be a non-weapon. And every non-weapon part has... Here's what I'm thinking. Tell me what you think of this, right? Just as a general, like, system. If I was giving you this as an engineer, giving you this as you're the designer, and I'm like,
Okay.
here's the system that I have. What do you think of this, right? Weapons have... Whoa. Weapons have a value for... Weapons have a list of damage types and a list of damage modifiers for those types. So, like, let's say multipliers, because that's what it is, right? Damage multipliers for those types. Non-weapon parts have a list of damage resistances and damage multipliers for those types, right? Damage resistance types. All other unlisted damage types are at 1.0. Does that make sense in terms of, like, weapon parts have a list of damage types and a list of damage multipliers for those types, and the non-weapon parts have a list of damage resistant types and a damage multiplier for those types. So, like, if you wanted dragon scale armor to resist fire, it would have fire in its resistance type at 0.5, so you take half damage from fire. And if you wanted a flaming sword, it would have a part that has a fire damage type and a multiplier of, like, 1.2. So it does 120% of your velocity in fire damage.
Yeah. If I were designing weapons for your game, I would understand that if I was designing a weapon, I'd define how much damage it does, what type of damage it does, and the multiplier of the damage. And then I'm separately also designing non-weapons, so I'm assuming that means, like, objects or armor or
anything
non-weapons are the, like, damageable things, right?
Yeah, anything that can take damage is a non-weapon.
So, you know, I designed a non-weapon part, and I'm like, well, how much of this damage type do I want to take? Do I want to reduce? How much of this other damage type do I want to reduce?
Yep.
That sort of thing. So if I'm designing the snake boss, for example,
yep.
I'm gonna give it fire resistance because this snake has fire resistant scales. So each part on it
I think I'm
that
being
is
followed.
damageable
What could they want from me?
takes
Thank you
less
for
fire
follow.
damage.
Right. And if you wanted to, in this case, right, if you wanted to have only the head of the snake be damageable, the head would be a non-weapon part, and the rest of the body segments would be weapon parts.
Correct.
Yeah. I think this answers a lot of questions. I think what I need to do from the engineering perspective, and this is me rambling. I think what I need to do is I need to make a parent class of weapon parts and non-weapon parts, damageables, I guess I should call them, right?
Yeah.
Damageable parts. So I should make a parent class of a weapon part and a parent class of a damageable part. And those are the things of which a character is constructed. And then, in addition, a character can have children. And if a character has children, there's a joint connecting each of the children, right? So, in the flail example, the player gets a collection of parts that make up their character body. They get a collection of parts that makes up the stick part of the flail weapon. They get a child, which is the flail ball, and a joint, a child joint, which the child owns, that connects the child back to the parent. The child then has all of the same characteristics of the parent, damageable class or weapon class, and that in addition to the joint that they have, right? So when you create a child, it can consist entirely of weapon parts with no damageable parts, and therefore function the same as if it was connected directly to, as if those fixtures were connected directly to the parent's body. If that makes sense. I need to write that down before I forget. Okay. Quick outline of how characters are constructed. Parent character class has... Why is the tab so big? Has a list of damageable parts. Can be of length 0. A list of weapon parts can be of length 0. At least one of the two lists must be non-zero length. Optionally, a list of children, of child character objects with the same condition for parts. If the same conditions for parts, and additionally a joint object linking it to the parent. This introduces a limitation, but one that I think I'm okay with. So in the case of, for example, a 3-headed flail, it would be linked to the handle, 3 children, each with their own joint. In the case of a 3-segment staff, the first segment would be linked to the character, and the second segment would be linked to the first child via a joint apiece. So that supports that. It supports multiple parts on a multiple weapon parts on a single character. So you could have like 2 shields on your sides, 2 spiked shields on either side of you, and that would be 2 weapon parts on your character who has a damageable part in the middle. You could be the 2 shield guy from Dark Souls if you wanted. I think that supports all of those things, and then each part is an individual set of fixture. No, is an individual fixture. Right? So then a weapon part has physics, fixture, and related properties. This is fixed by Box 2D. We don't define that. We have to give it all of those properties, but we don't define them, right? They're pre-existing. So that's density. Density, friction, restitution, sensor, responds to collision or detects only. And shape. Right? And then it also has a list of damage types and associated multipliers. And that's it, right? That's it for a weapon part. And a damageable part consists of WAG. Just copy this. Right? It consists of the physics fixture and then a list of damage resistances and associated multipliers. So that defines the stuff that I need. What this doesn't allow for implicitly is... No, I think this is fine. The limitation that this would not allow for is a boss composed of multiple damageable segments that could be individually destroyed. Instead, the boss would need to consist of multiple characters which work in concert to produce the image of the boss, right? So in the snake example, if you wanted individual snake body segments to be able to die separately, you would build the snake as like 10 characters, and each character would be responsible for its own weapon parts and damageable parts, and as they took damage, that character would die, and the boss character would have a list of like... And this is where I say, like, complex characters get special code. The boss would maybe have, like, the head would have a dependency list of, like, if all these other characters die, then you also die. Right? And that's something, like, that I can add easily later on to the metadata stuff of, like, hey, this actor, this intelligence controls multiple characters and is alive until all of the multiple characters have died. But when an individual character dies, eliminate that character from the play their death animation and do all that stuff. So it supports that.
Oh, sounds good.
This is, I think, this I think gets me to where this solves the immediate problem at least, and having the other information there is super helpful in thinking about what else is going to be in there. I hadn't thought about the idea that there's basically 3 enemy types. This is super helpful. Yeah. There's weapon parts. Character consists of multiple weapon parts and damageable parts. They might have children, and the children can be... Yeah. Damageable parts on the child refer damage to the ultimate parent's metagame object. The metagame object is where we store like HP and intelligence points, strength and muscle points, and brawn.
Might.
Yeah.
Power.
I love the idea that every stat is just a different way of saying the same thing.
Physique.
Yeah, physique. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's all the mental energy I have. And we've hit this is it. This is the stuff. This accomplishes everything I hope to get out of this.
Yeah, and you should put these things in their respective categories.
I'll do that offline, I'm sure. Surely I will.
That makes sense to you.
Yeah, this page is... I probably have to, revisit this page and rewrite it entirely. This would go down here.
This is where, wiki formatting is useful, because then you can, relegate this to a different page and not have it on your main design doc.
Right. Again, this is very specifically, this is the stuff that I absolutely needed to get done. This accomplishes the entire purpose of starting with the game design document at the level that it is and getting down to this and knowing all the stuff we needed to be able to write this out in an understandable way that's translatable to code. Right? And then yeah, so there's that. And then a weapon consists of Yeah. I'll deal with that. I'll reconcile this thing with this thing, because that changes what a weapon consists of. Anyway, I think this has been a super, super productive chat. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No
for
problem.
your help.
Happy to help you with your gaming ambitions. Gaming ambitions of Nobunaga.
Folks, if he streams again anytime soon, check out Dr. Tasty. Very, very smart dude. Very, very... what's the word I'm looking for? Not well-educated, but, very experienced with a lot of game design stuff.
I'm a senior game designer, senior level game designer. That means I'm very old and about to break my hips and need them replaced. So, thanks for the kind words.
No, absolutely. I'm always excited when I know you're going to be streaming. So I do like to point more people to your stream so they can come enjoy the show.
I don't usually have a lot of time to do it, but and it's infrequent, but I will give y'all the heads up when I decide to play something, or even do a development stream. I've been thinking about doing that.
Yeah, it would be dope.
Doing prototypes and Unreal. You get to see how that works.
The Unreal experience.
But thanks for having me on your stream.
Yeah,
and,
thanks.
Good luck.
Thanks for the assistance with the design. It's like I said, it's invaluable, and it led me to like. It's important that we did all the other stuff first, because getting to the point where we can define the things that I need right away are like. It was paramount to it, so it's like. I didn't have the fortitude to sit down and like actually think through. I'm like, you got to drag me kicking and screaming through the like bigger. Broader strokes so that I can get down to the details that I need at this moment, because I'm like, no, give me the details, yeah.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in that.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I reached out, right? Is like, I know myself that I'm gonna just sit down and be like, well, I need this thing. Okay, let me write down this thing, and if I need that thing, then I need this thing, and I'm like, just going straight down. And not going over to column 2 ever. And it's like, well, yeah. Anyway. But yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. Thanks for coming on here. Let's I'm going to find somebody to raid. If you want to, so we can hop off the call so you don't, unless you want to like talk over the end screen for some reason.
Yeah, let's do it. We're going to raid people, chat.
Who we got? Let's rate Dr. CDCS. Dr. CDCS is playing something interesting. Shadows of Cairn, which is an insane, psychotic, cinematic platformer.
Dr. CDCS is an interesting streamer.
Let's start that raid. This will be an interesting thing to look at. I know Fractal Mind Mike has been thinking about cinematic platformers. Dr. CDCS, good dude. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching, everyone. Thank you for the bits and the subs and all that. Dr. Tasty, thank you for joining me on the stream. Thank you for giving us all a tremendous amount of insight into both the big games industry and individual projects and game design and documentation. Very cool.
Happy to do so.
I thought you were going to say Happy New Year, and I was like, okay. Happy New Year.
Everybody. And happy birthday.
Get out your Valentine's Carols books.
Oh yeah, Valentine's is coming up. Get ready for Rudolph the Valentine's deer.
Dashing through the snow in a Valentine's open sleigh.
Pro tip for chat: you can spam your voices even after the stream is over, and he'll still hear it until he turns it off.
Have a great night, everyone. See you all again very soon.
Night, everybody.
Eaza cursed the demon for invading her sanctuary and attacked.
Water.
How may I
When
help?
he was accosted by the